The sun was an executioner. It had been, by the local reckoning, 104 days since the last meaningful rain. The year was 1879, and the dry season had clenched its fist around the San Juan River basin. The land itself, a high, raw plateau of red rock and bleached juniper, seemed to be holding its breath. In the center of this thirsty world sat the town, a jagged scar of adobe, raw pine, and nervous ambition. A flag of yellow dust, kicked up by a passing freight wagon, hung stiffly in the air. It coated the boardwalks, settled on the hats of the men standing outside the saloon, and filmed the windows of the First Baptist Church. It was trade day. The main street, usually empty save for a few stray dogs, was a tangle of noise, commerce, and suspicion. From the hitching post outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, a horse screamed. It was a high, tearing sound of pure misery, a protest against a tightly cinched rein and the brutal heat. Across the street, the church, new and proud, tried to answer. Its bell, imported at great cost from St. Louis, offered a thin, metallic clang. Clang, clang. The horse screamed again, and won. The bell just sounded lonely. Ashki Yazi watched this contest of sounds from the deep, cool shade of the livery. He was a man who knew how to wait. He stood so still that the dust motes seemed to avoid him, settling on the rough-hewn planks around him instead. He was Dine, a man who belonged to the canyons and mesas, not to these straight, dusty streets. His stillness was not empty. It was alert. He was a scout, and in these tense years, a courier. He carried messages, warnings, and the fragile threads of diplomacy between the scattered Dine camps and the nervous authority of the border towns. The settlers saw him as a shadow. The merchants saw him as a potential customer for tobacco. The children watched him with a wide-eyed, silent dread. He, in turn, saw them all as temporary, as loud as the horse and as hollow as the bell. He was not a large man, but he was built of things that lasted sinew, patience, and silence. His black hair was tied back with a simple leather cord. His eyes, the color of wet slate, missed nothing. He noted the new Winchester rifle in the sheriff's scabbard, the way the telegraph operator's hands shook as he smoked a cigarette, the slight, rolling limp of Silas Kincaid's newest hired man. Ashki was quiet, not from shyness, but from economy. Words had weight. He used them as he used the water in his canteen sparingly, and only when necessary. He lived by the old laws, the deep traditions of Hozo balance, harmony, and walking in beauty. This town, with its saloon, its church, and its barbed wire, seemed dedicated to the destruction of all three. He carried a vow. It was a private thing, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. His older brother, gone now, lost in the last forced relocation, had whispered it to him before the soldiers took him east. Do not let them use the dagger of their laws on the skin of this land. Ashki's gaze drifted to the new survey stakes driven into the earth just south of the town, their yellow pine tops screaming against the red dirt. The railroad men. The dagger was already being sharpened. Into this simmering pot of dust and greed walked Clara Whitfield. She had arrived 3 weeks before on the morning stage from Kansas. Kansas, with its black soil, its gentle rains, and its civilized disagreements, felt like a different lifetime. Clara was the town's new teacher, hired by the same committee that had funded the church bell. But she was also a trained midwife. Her crates had contained not just primers and chalk, but carbolic acid, clean bandages, laudanum, and dried herbs. She was setting up a table now, on the boardwalk in front of the general store. She had permission from the proprietor, a nervous man who was happy for the business but wary of the attention. A sign, painted in neat black letters on a piece of barrel stave, read, Clinic, Consultation, and Midwifery. C. Whitfield. Clara was tall, with a practical set to her chin and eyes the color of faded denim. She believed, with a fierce, educated optimism, in equality. She believed that education and medicine were rights, not privileges. This belief was a bright, clean dress she had worn from the East, and it had not yet been stained by the realities of the high desert. In her trunk, beneath her wool skirts, was a locked, leather-bound journal. It was not a diary of her feelings. It was an ethnography. In it, she sketched the local flora, noted the variations in the dine-weaving patterns she saw at the trading post, recorded the prices of flour and beans, and tried to map the complex, unspoken social laws of the town. Law here is divided. She had written the night before, her pencil scratching by candlelight. The sacred and the profane share a single street. The saloon governs the body and the wallet. The church governs the soul and the timetable. And hovering over both is Mr. Kincaid, who seems to believe he governs all the land the sun touches. Silas Kincaid himself was presently proving her point. He stood on the raised porch of his saloon, thumbs hooked in his expensive vest. Kincaid owned the Circle K Ranch, the largest in the territory, but that was just a front for his real work land acquisition. He was the quiet partner of the railroad surveyors, the man who cleared obstacles. His tools were money, intimidation, and a close, unspoken alliance with the bounty men who hunted renegade natives for government pay. He wanted the canyon route that cut straight through Dine ancestral land. It would make him rich. He intended to have it, and he preferred his solutions to be violent and final. He saw Clara setting up her table and nudged the man beside him, a burly specimen wearing a deputy's star that sat crooked on his vest. "Well now, look at that," Kincaid said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble that held no warmth at all. "The new schoolmarm is playing doctor, making friends with the local wildlife." "I see." The deputy spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "She's trouble, that one. Reading books to those Mexican children, filling heads with ideas." "She is," Kincaid agreed, a cold smile touching his lips. "But trouble is just another word for opportunity." He watched Ashki Yazzie in the shadows of the livery. He knew the scout by reputation. The man was clever, a ghost in the canyons. He was an obstacle, and Silas Kincaid was a man who removed obstacles. Clara, unaware of the scrutiny, felt a different kind of pressure. Her idealism was a brave coat she wore over a cold, private terror. Teaching was her cover. Healing was her trade. But her mission was a secret knot in her stomach. She was searching for her sister, Evelyn. Evelyn, the adventurous one, the one who wrote letters full of wonder and laughter, had come west 2 years before. 6 months ago, the letters stopped. The last word had come from a disgraced Pinkerton agent in Santa Fe, a drunkard who, for $5, claimed Evelyn had been swept up by a bounty crew working for a man named Marshall Riker. Taken south, he had slurred, to a mine, perhaps, or worse. Clara scanned the faces of the rough men at the trade fair, the hard-eyed traders and mule skinners. Any one of them might have seen her. Any one of them might have been involved. Her gaze kept drifting to Kincaid. He had dealings in the South. The trade fair was reaching its midday peak. The air smelled of dust, horse manure, frying lard from the pie wagon, and the sharp tang of juniper smoke. It was then that Ashki Yazzie moved. He emerged from the shade, not walking into the crowd so much as through it, parting it without a single touch. He was followed by a small family, an older woman, her face a beautiful map of deep time, a younger man who might be his cousin, and a small boy of about 7 clutching the woman's hand. The older woman was coughing. It was a dry, hacking sound that shook her small frame. She leaned heavily on the younger man, her breathing a shallow, painful rasp. Ashki led them past the saloon, past the gunsmith, past the trading post. He stopped directly in front of Clara Whitfield's table. The noise of the street seemed to dim. Clara looked up from arranging her bottles of iodine and quinine. He was unlike any man she had ever seen up close. He was not wearing the buckskins of a frontiersman or the wool suit of a townsman. He wore simple cotton trousers and a dark shirt, practical and clean. He looked at her, and his eyes held the vast, impersonal emptiness of the sky just before dawn. They were appraising, intelligent, and held no warmth at all. "She has the dust fever," Ashki said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air, clear and precise. "The herbs do not work." He held up a small, worn pouch, showing it to her as a sign of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of her medicine. Clara's nervousness, the fear of Kincaid, the ache for her sister, all of it vanished. It was replaced by the clean, cool focus of her training. She looked past him to the old woman. She saw the rapid, shallow breathing, the gray-blue tint to her lips, the exhaustion that was more than just the heat. "Bring her here, out of the sun," Clara said, her voice calm and firm. She gestured to a stool she had placed in the narrow strip of shade by the store's wall. "Please, let me look at her." The younger man hesitated, looking to Ashki for permission. Ashki's gaze did not leave Clara's face. He was assessing her. He had seen white healers before, men with loud voices and miracle tonics that were mostly alcohol and molasses. He had seen the army doctors who treated his people with contempt, or worse, with fear. This woman was different. Her eyes were clear. She did not look at him like a savage or a curiosity. She looked at the old woman like a problem to be solved. Clara met his stare. She would not be the first to look away. This was her ground. "I have a tincture of mullein and horehound. It will not cure her, but it may ease the lungs and help her breathe. And she must have clean water. The well water is bad." She turned, her movements efficient, and poured a measure of water from her personal canteen into a clean tin cup, then added several drops from a brown bottle. Ashki watched her hands. They were steady. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The younger man gently helped the old woman to the stool. Clara knelt in the dust, her clean skirt settling around her. She offered the cup to the old woman. "Sip this," she said gently, her voice soft. Slowly. The old woman's eyes, cloudy with sickness, looked from Clara to Ashki. He nodded again. She drank. Ashki Yazi did not move. He stood like a sentinel, watching Clara's face as she spoke softly to the woman, watching as she placed a cool hand on the woman's forehead. He was a man who understood the skin of the land, and he was watching a stranger lay her hands upon it. This was their beginning. There was no thunderclap, no tremor in the earth. It was only the yellow flag of dust hanging in the air, the brutal sun beating down, and the first fragile intersection of two worlds that wanted nothing more than to be left alone. He saw Kincaid watching them from across the street, saw the cold, speculative smile. He knew that smile. It was the smile of the soldier who had burned his uncle's fields. It was the smile of the land agent who sold plots that were not his to sell. It was the smile of the dagger. The old woman finished the water and her coughing eased. Just a fraction. She looked at Clara and whispered a few words in Dine. Ashki translated, his voice flat, emotionless. "She says you have good hands. She says they are not cold." Clara Whitfield finally stood, her knees stiff, brushing the red dust from her skirt. She looked at Ashki Yazi, truly looked at him, past the warning, past the stillness. "Tell her," Clara said, her voice quiet but carrying, "that I am grateful." The horse screamed again. The church bell began its hopeless ringing. The sun did not relent, but on the shaded boardwalk of the general store, a single, fragile thread had been spun, connecting a vow of protection to a mission of healing. It was not trust. It was not even understanding. It was simply a possibility. And in the high desert of 1879, that was almost enough. The moment of quiet connection at the trade day dissolved as quickly as it had formed. The air, heavy with heat, soon turned thick with a new, arrogant energy. It was the sound of iron tires crushing dry earth and the jangle of heavy harnesses. 3 large wagons, led by Silas Kincaid on his fine chestnut horse, rolled into the center of the street. They stopped not at the livery, but directly in front of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Kincaid's men, a dozen of them, fanned out, their expressions ranging from dull obedience to open malice. They were not ranchers. They were men hired for their indifference to the sound of a gunshot. Ashkey had moved the old woman and her family into the deep shade of the Mercantile Alley. He was observing Kincaid from this new vantage point, his body pressed against the hot adobe. He knew this kind of theater. It was a performance of power. Kincaid dismounted, not bothering to tie his horse. He walked onto the saloon porch, his boots loud on the planks. He held up a rolled parchment, tied with a bright blue ribbon. A little attention. Kincaid's voice was the pleasant rumble Clara had noted before, but now it was amplified, oiled with false authority. The street fell silent. Even the church bell had stopped. By authority of the territorial circuit judge, and in accordance with the Western Expansion Act, certain lands are being reapportioned for the public good. He unrolled the document with a snap. This here is a permit. It grants the railroad right-of-way through the lower canyons. This means progress, gentlemen. It means wealth. A nervous cheer rose from his own men, thin and unconvincing. It also means, Kincaid continued, his voice hardening, that the illegal encampment, the Dine village, squatting on that route must be removed. They have 30 days to vacate, after which the Territorial Commission has authorized whatever force is necessary. Ashkey Yazzie did not blink. His blood did not run cold. It ran slow and hot. The dagger of their laws, the village Kincaid named, was not on the route. It was miles north, but it was ancestral land, a sacred place, and it blocked Kincaid's private access to the water rights he desperately needed for his mining operations. The railroad was the excuse, the permit was the lie, and the village was the target. Clara, packing her medical supplies, froze. She had heard of these removals. She had read about them in the Kansas papers, articles that painted the natives as obstacles to civilization. Now, she was watching the mechanism of displacement being assembled right in front of her. One of Kincaid's men, a burly man named Jed, whose face was a map of old bar fights, was enjoying the sudden fear in the air. He saw a small Dine boy, maybe 10 years old, trying to slip past the crowd, clutching a piece of stale bread he had likely scavenged. Jed's boot shot out, tripping the boy. The child went down hard in the dust, the bread flying from his hand. "Where you going, little shadow?" Jed sneered, grabbing the boy by the collar and hauling him to his feet. The boy, terrified, did not make a sound. "Stealin', were you?" Jed shook him, the boy's head snapping back and forth. "We got rules about thieves here." He raised his open hand to strike the child. "Stop it!" Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence. Every eye on the street turned to her. Jed paused, his hand in the air. Kincaid, on the porch, watched with a detached scientific curiosity. Clara walked forward, her hands clenched at her sides. She left her satchel, her defenses, behind. She stopped 6 feet from Jed. "Let go of him," she said. Jed laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "And who are you?" "Ma'am, the boy's mother." "I am a teacher," Clara said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "And I am a healer. You are shaking that child so hard you could detach his brain from his skull." "You could kill him. Let him go." This was a language Jed understood, an accusation. "You calling me a killer, you thin piece of piety?" He shoved the boy to the ground. The child hit the dust and scrambled away, disappearing into an alley like a frightened rabbit. Jed turned his full, drunken attention to Clara. The saloon porch emptied as Kincaid's other men sensed a diversion. "I think the schoolmarm needs to learn some manners," Jed said, stepping toward her. "Jed, that is enough." Kincaid called from the porch, his voice lazy. He was not protecting Clara. He was managing his asset. A brawl was fine. Harming a white woman in public was a different, more complicated kind of paperwork. But Jed was drunk, and his pride was stung. "She insulted me, boss." He reached for Clara's arm. "You're coming inside. Have a drink. We'll teach you how we handle smart women out west." The crowd tensed. The townsfolk backed away. The sheriff, who had been watching from his office, quietly turned and went back inside. Before Jed's fingers could close on her sleeve, a shadow detached itself from the alley. Ashki Yazzie moved with a fluid economy that was terrifying. He did not punch Jed. He did not draw a weapon. He simply stepped between the man and Clara. He caught Jed's thick wrist in one hand. Jed, startled, tried to pull free. He could not. Ashki's grip was not about muscle. It was about placement. With his other hand, Ashki applied pressure to the nerves just below Jed's elbow. It was not a strike. It was a simple, educated push. Jed's arm went dead. A strangled cry of pain and confusion escaped his lips. His knees buckled. "She is leaving," Ashki said. His voice was perfectly level. The street was utterly silent. Ashki released Jed's wrist. The man stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face pale with shock and rage. Ashki did not look at Jed again. He did not look at Kincaid. He looked at Clara. "Get your bag," he said. Clara, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, grabbed her medical satchel. "You," Kincaid said from the porch, his voice no longer pleasant. He was speaking to Ashki. "I will remember your face." Ashki Yazzie turned his head and met the rancher's gaze. His eyes were flat, deep, and empty. "I know," he said. It was a statement of fact. It meant, "You already do, and I am still here." He put one hand lightly on Clara's back, a gesture not of intimacy, but of steering, like moving a recalcitrant pony. He pushed her toward the livery, away from the center of the street. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. As they reached the shade of the livery, the tension behind them broke. Jed, enraged and humiliated, grabbed the nearest man who looked at him sideways and threw a punch. The street exploded into a chaotic, pointless brawl. Ashki pushed Clara into an empty stall. The air smelled of hay and ammonia. "He was going to hurt her," Clara whispered, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her bag. "He was," Ashki agreed. He was watching the brawl, his eyes cataloging which townsfolk fought Kincaid's men and which ones ran. "You have a talent for finding the deep water." Clara bristled, her fear turning to indignation. "And you would have let him eat—" "I do not know," Ashki said honestly. "The fight was not mine, until you made it yours. And then, it was ours." He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "You are not a frail woman. Miss Whitfield, you are a fool, but you are not frail." Before she could form a reply, a man hurried into the livery, keeping low. It was the telegraph operator, a nervous young man named Spencer. "Miss Whitfield," he panted, his eyes wide from the fight outside. I have something, a message, not on the wire, a freight driver. Shorty, he came in this morning from the south." "What is it?" Clara asked, her stomach clenching. "He said to tell you. He heard the name, your sister's name, Evelyn." Clara grabbed the front of Spencer's shirt. "Where? What did he hear?" "At the supply depot at Silver Mercy Mine." Spencer rushed on. "He said he did not see her, but he heard the guards talking. They said the new girl from Kansas was proving difficult. He said the supplies for that mine, the ones he was hauling, they are all billed to Silas Kincaid." Clara released the man. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening, cold finality. Kincaid, the man threatening the Dine village, the man whose hireling just tried to assault her, was the same man supplying the prison camp that held her sister. "Thank you, Spencer," she said, her voice hollow. The operator nodded, terrified, and scurried away. Clara turned to Ashki. He had heard every word. He was looking at her, but his mind was elsewhere, fitting this new information into the pattern he already knew. This mine, Clara said. Silver Mercy. Do you know it? I know the canyon, Ashki said. It is a bad place. The rocks there are sick. My people do not go there. My sister is there, Clara said. Ashki looked at the brawl, which was now being broken up by the sheriff, who had finally decided to emerge. Kincaid was watching, smiling, his permit still in his hand. I must go and see the land he wants, Ashki said, his voice low. He was speaking more to himself than to her. The permit is the first cut. The second will be deeper. He slipped out of the livery, disappearing between the buildings without a sound. Clara was left alone in the hay-scented dimness, her world reduced to two facts. Her sister was alive, and Silas Kincaid was the man who held the key. She thought about the law. She could go to the sheriff, but the sheriff had hidden from the fight. She could send a wire to the territorial governor, but Spencer, the operator, was clearly terrified of Kincaid. The law here was a closed loop. It began and ended on Kincaid's porch. Her mind, trained in the logic of Kansas, in the rules of civilized society, hit a wall. To follow the law was to file a complaint that would be ignored. It was to write a letter that would be burned. It was to let Kincaid win. It was to let Evelyn die. The only other path led south, into the Badlands, into the sick canyon Ashki had spoken of. Meanwhile, Ashki rode. His pony moved like a whisper over the sandstone. He skirted the town and cut south toward the canyon Kincaid had named. It took him 2 hours, riding hard. He found the tracks, not surveyors. 3 men. They were careless. They smoked cigars and left the butts on the ground. They were white men, wearing heavy boots, riding shod horses. They were bounty men. He could smell the sour whiskey on the air long after they had passed. He followed the trail to a high ridge overlooking the canyon, and he saw what they had done. They had found a small, empty hogan, a summer shelter used by shepherds, and they had set it on fire. The smoke was a black stain against the red rock, near the smoldering ruin. They had scattered a few spent rifle cartridges, army issue. Ashki dismounted and picked one up. It was still warm. He understood. This was Kincaid's evidence. This was the proof that the dying were hostile. This was the justification for the permit, for the force, for the removal. Kincaid was not just taking the land. He was manufacturing the war to justify it. Ashki's internal vow, the promise to his brother, burned in his chest. He had made a principle of non-interference. He had told himself that the Bilagana, the white men, would destroy each other eventually. He only had to protect his own. But he saw the pattern now. Kincaid's permit, the burned hogan, the bounty men, the mine called Silver Mercy, the woman from Kansas. They were not separate threads. They were all part of the same rope. Kincaid was using the mine to fund the bounty men. He was using the bounty men to create a false war. He was using the false war to activate his permit. And the permit let him steal the land. His people and her sister were tied to the same fate. To save one, he had to save the other. His principle of non-interference was a luxury he could no longer afford. It was a dead thing. He rode back to town under the cover of a bruised purple twilight. He found Clara standing in the shadows between the silent church and the dark mercantile. She looked lost, small and furious, and, "There is no law here," she said, without preamble. I went to the sheriff. He told me I was hysterical. He offered me a brandy. "There is a law," Ashki said, stopping his pony a few feet from her. "You saw it today. Kincaid's law." He slid from the saddle. "They are burning the hogan south of here, planting bullets. They are making their own reasons to take the land." Clara looked up at him, her face pale in the gloom. "He has my sister in a mine. He is using her and others to pay for all of this." "I know," Ashki said. A long silence settled between them. The only sound was the tired creak of the saloon sign in the evening breeze. "I am going south," Clara said, her voice shaking but absolute. "I am going to Silver Mercy Mine. You will not find it." Ashki replied, "And if you do, you will die before you see the entrance." "Then I will die," she said. Ashki studied her. He saw the foolishness, the Eastern softness, but beneath it, he saw the same iron that had made her kneel in the dust to help the old woman, the same iron that made her stand up to Jed. It was a different kind of strength than his, but it was strong. "I am riding south tonight," Ashki said, his voice quiet. "I am going to find the men who burned the Hogan. They are the proof that the permit is a lie." Clara took a step closer. "They are the same men, the bounty men, the men who work for Riker, the men who have my sister." "It is likely," he conceded. "Then we are going to the same place," Clara stated. Ashki looked at the sky. The first stars were sharp, cold pinpricks. He had always walked alone. It was safer. It was cleaner. But the world had changed. The rope was tightening. "You will slow me down," he said. "I am a midwife," Clara repeated, as if it were a creed. "I can set a bone, stitch a wound, and I know which plants kill and which ones cure. I will not be a burden. I will be useful." He thought of the vow to his brother. Do not let them use the dagger. This woman, this teacher, she was the only other person in this entire territory who saw the dagger for what it was. "We leave in 1 hour," Ashki said. "Before the moon is high, bring your medicine, bring water, wear dark clothes, bring nothing else." He did not wait for her answer. He turned, leading his pony into the absolute darkness of the livery. Clara stood for a moment, her heart a cold, hard stone in her chest. She had crossed a line. The old rules were gone. She was on her own. She turned and ran to her small rented room behind the schoolhouse, her mind racing, not with fear, but with a terrible, clarifying purpose. They rode south, leaving the town's nervous lights behind them. The moon, a cold, silver coin, climbed the sky, offering just enough light to turn the landscape into a study of sharp shadows and pale stone. Ashki Yazi had insisted they ride without a lantern. He led the way, his pony seeming to find a path where none existed. Clara followed, her horse, rented from the livery, stumbling and blowing nervously in the dark. After an hour, he stopped. He did not turn in the saddle, but his voice, low and clear, carried back to her. "Your horse is walking on glass," he said. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her cheeks hot with frustration. "I am doing my best." "Do not be sorry. Be quiet." He slipped from his pony and walked back to her. He stood at her stirrup, looking not at her, but at the ground. "You are listening for snakes. Your horse is doing the same, but the ground is telling you a different story." He pointed. "Sandstone. It holds the day's heat. It is solid. Let him walk." He touched the horse's neck. A brief, firm gesture. "Here, the gravel. It rolls. This is where he must be slow. You are pulling the reins in the wrong places. Let him see with his feet. Feel what he feels." Clara nodded, her throat tight. In Kansas, she rode on groomed roads, on soft black earth. This was like walking on a broken plate. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "And you breathe too loud. Breathe in through the nose. Let the air fill your stomach, not your chest. It makes less noise." He returned to his pony and mounted in a single, fluid motion. They moved on. Clara focused, trying to emulate the silence he carried. She breathed deep, felt the rhythm of her horse, the shift from stone to sand. She began to understand. This was not just riding. It was a conversation with the earth. He taught her other things without speaking. He taught her how to use a ridgeline to mask their shape against the stars. He taught her that the wind, coming from the east, carried the smell of water miles away, even in this drought. In turn, she offered her own knowledge. When they stopped to rest the horses, she noticed a small, clean cut on the fetlock of Ashki's pony, likely from a sharp piece of slate. "That will go lame if it fills with dirt," she said, sliding from her saddle. He watched her, skeptical, as she opened her medical satchel. She did not take out a bottle, but a small tin. "This is comfrey and yarrow, in a base of clean tallow," she explained, her voice as practical as his. "It will seal the wound and keep the fever out." She knelt, her movements calm, and spoke softly to the horse. The animal, sensing her confidence, allowed her to clean the cut and apply the salve. Ashki watched her hands, the same hands that had held the cup for the old woman. They were not cold. He had remedies, poultices his grandmother had taught him, but they were for later, for camp. Her medicine was for now. It was quick. It was efficient. He filed the information away. They rode for another 2 hours. The moon began to set, and the world grew darker. Then the wind changed. It had been coming from the east, smelling of water. Now it stopped. The air became utterly still, heavy and hot. A strange, yellow-gray light began to bloom in the west. Ashki stopped. He sat on his pony, his head raised, tasting the air. "What is it?" Clara asked, the silence suddenly terrifying. "The sky is turning over," he said. He dismounted quickly. "Dismount, now. Tie the horses. Tie them to that ironwood. Tight." "What is it?" she asked again, her voice rising as she fumbled with the reins. "Dust," he said. "A red wall. We have very little time." He grabbed her arm. Pulling her away from the horses, he ran, half dragging her, toward a low outcrop of black volcanic rock. The air had begun to whine, a high, thin sound like a wire being stretched to its breaking point. "Here!" he shouted over the rising noise. He pushed aside a curtain of dry, dead brush, revealing a narrow crevice in the rock, barely wide enough for one man. "Get in, all the way to the back!" Clara scrambled inside, her lungs tight with panic. The space was claustrophobic, smelling of dry earth and animal droppings. Ashki pushed in behind her, his body pressing against hers. He pulled the dry brush back over the opening, and then the world ended. It was not a storm. It was an avalanche of sound and pressure. The air was sucked from the crevice, followed by a roaring, screaming force that seemed to shake the foundations of the rock. It was pitch black. Clara cried out, pressing her face into the rough wool of Ashki's shirt. He put a hand on the back of her head, holding her steady. "Do not breathe deep," he yelled, his voice muffled in her hair. "Cover your mouth. Use your scarf." They huddled together, two small, terrified heartbeats in the belly of a screaming god. The sand, finer than flour, forced its way through the brush, filling the air, stinging their skin, coating their tongues. The roar was constant, a physical weight that pressed against them. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the darkness, the pressure, the sound, and the steady, solid presence of the man pressed against her. In a lull, when the roaring subsided to a deafening shriek, Clara spoke, her voice cracked. Is this normal?" She felt his chest move in what might have been a laugh. "It is not unusual," he shouted back. "The land is angry. It is scouring itself clean." They fell silent again. The space was small, intimate in a way that was devoid of all romance. It was the intimacy of two people sharing a grave. To fight the panic, Clara forced her mind to work. "Kincaid, his men, they were out here." "If they were caught on open ground," Ashki replied, his voice calm. "They are dead, or their horses are..." Either way, they are blind. Another wave of wind hit, harder this time. Clara flinched. "You are not afraid of much," he observed, his voice closer to her ear. "I am terrified," she admitted, "but I am more afraid of failing." "Failing your sister," he stated. "Yes, and," she hesitated, "and failing myself, back home. I was supposed to marry a man, a good man, a banker." He said nothing, but his stillness was an invitation. He read the newspapers about the territories. He called the displacement of your people. He called it manifest destiny. He said it was God's will, a natural clearing of the wilderness for a better, stronger people. He said it with such satisfaction. She was shaking now, but not from the storm. I looked at him, this man I thought I knew, and I saw a stranger. I saw Silas Kincaid. I saw a man who could justify anything. As long as it made him rich, I told him his God was too small, and his heart was too cheap. I left 2 weeks later. Ashki was silent for a long time. The wind howled, a mournful chorus. "My brother," he said finally, his voice so low she almost missed it. "He was not killed by a soldier, not in battle. He was killed during the relocation. He refused to leave our cornfield. He said the corn was our mother, and he would not leave her. A soldier, a young man, younger than I am now, told him to move." My brother stood still. Clara held her breath. "The soldier hit him with his rifle butt. A sergeant told him to stop, but the boy was angry or afraid. He hit him again. My brother fell. His head hit a stone that had marked our field for 100 years. Ashki's voice was flat, a simple telling of a fact. "He did not die right away. I sat with him. He told me, 'They have made the law into a dagger. Do not let them cut the skin of the land.'" He shifted, his shoulder pressing against hers. "Your banker, the soldier, Kincaid, they are the same man. They believe the land is dead. They believe we are dead. They are wrong." A new, profound quiet settled between them, deeper than the silence of the desert. The storm raged on, but inside the small, dark space, something had been shared. A recognition. They were not just allies of convenience. They were survivors of the same hollow creed. When the storm finally passed, it was not a sudden stop, but a slow unwinding. The roar faded to a moan, then a whisper, then silence. Ashki pushed the brush aside. The world was gone. It had been replaced by a new one. The sun was rising, casting a sickly yellow light on a landscape that had been transformed. Everything was covered in a deep, fine, red dust. The air was still, but thick, difficult to breathe. Their horses were still there, half buried in a drift, terrified but alive. As they dug them out, Ashki scanning the new horizon, Clara saw it, a dark shape, half a mile away. That did not belong. "Look," she said. It was a wagon, overturned. One of Kincaid's. The patrol had been caught. They walked the horses over. The silence of the new world broken only by their own labored breathing. The wagon was shattered. 2 horses were dead, their necks broken. There was no sign of the men. "They are alive," Ashki said, pointing to tracks already filling with drifting sand. "Walking east, back to town. They are on foot. This buys us time." A sound, thin and human, cut the air. A groan. It came from beneath a pile of canvas and splintered wood. They pulled the debris away. A man was pinned underneath, his leg trapped at a grotesque angle by a heavy axle. He was not one of Kincaid's men. He was younger, his face a blend of Mexican and Diné features, wearing the worn leather leggings of a vaquero. He was semi-conscious, muttering in a mix of Spanish and Dain Bizad. "He is one of the cousins," Ashki said, kneeling. "Miguel. He rides for the Hash Knife outfit. Sometimes." Clara was already at work. His leg is broken. Severely. We have to get this axle off him. Together, they used a broken wagon spoke as a lever. Ashki strained, his muscles cording, and lifted the axle just enough. Clara, showing surprising strength, pulled the man free. He screamed, a raw, terrible sound, and then his eyes focused. He looked at Ashki. "Dine," he gasped. Then he saw Clara. "Bilagana, what? What happened?" "The storm," Ashki said. "Kincaid's men." "They ran me down," Miguel panted, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Said I was rustling. They were going to hang me. Then the sky broke." "Be still," Clara said, her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone of her profession. She was cutting away his legging with a small, sharp knife. The bone was visible, a white splinter through the bloody muscle. "Ashki, I need water, and my bag." For the next hour, Ashki watched as Clara became a different person. She was no longer the Eastern teacher, the frightened woman in the storm. She was a field surgeon. She cleaned the wound, her hands steady, her face a mask of concentration. "This will hurt," she told Miguel, who was fading fast. "But I must set it." She looked at Ashki. "I need you to hold his shoulders. Hold him down. Do not let him move, no matter what he does." Ashki did as he was told, his respect for her growing with every efficient, painful, and necessary movement she made. She set the bone. Miguel roared and passed out. She splinted the leg using 2 pieces of the wagon, bandaging it tightly. "He will live," she said, sitting back on her heels, exhausted. "But he will get the fever if we do not get him to shade, and he cannot ride." "I know a place," Miguel whispered, his eyes fluttering open. "Close. A line shack, high on the ridge. Please, no me dejes. Do not leave me." "We will not leave you," Ashki said. He fashioned a travois from the remaining wagon parts and his lariat. They loaded Miguel onto it and began the slow, agonizing trek, Ashki's pony pulling the weight. Miguel directed them. He was right. The shack was close, hidden in a fold of the canyon wall. It was a miserable, one-room hovel, but it was shade. They made him as comfortable as possible. Clara gave him laudanum for the pain. "Kincaid's men, they passed here," Miguel muttered, his words slurred by the drug. "Before the storm, they follow the back trail to Silver Mercy." Clara's head snapped up. "You know the way to the mine." "Everyone knows the mine," Miguel said, his eyes closing. "But I know the way, the back trail, the one the guards do not watch. I used to deliver supplies." "What supplies?" Clara pressed, kneeling beside him. "Not food. Men, poor men from the south. They pay me to keep quiet." Miguel was growing weaker. "Rest," Ashki said, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Wait," Miguel breathed. He fumbled inside his torn shirt. "I took this from the courier, the one who led Kincaid's men. He lost it when his horse fell, just before the storm hit." He pulled out a heavy oilskin packet. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. It was not money. It was paperwork, a ledger, and more. There were transport documents, bills of lading for mining equipment that were clearly lists of men, names, ages, all marked as indentured. There was a letter, signed by a territorial judge, transferring custody of 6 vagrants to the Silver Mercy Mine Corporation for a fee. And at the bottom, there was a heavy brass seal. It was an eagle, clutching arrows, but the words around it were not e pluribus unum. They read Territorial Commission for Labor Reassignment. "It is a forgery," Clara whispered, her blood running cold. "This is not a mine. It is a slave camp." She scanned the lists, her heart pounding. Evelyn's name was not there. "I have to see it," she said, standing. "We cannot leave him," Ashki said. He is asleep, Clara said. The laudanum will hold him for hours. We are this close. I have to see the mine. I have to see the man in charge. Ashki looked at the documents. He looked at the sleeping man. He looked at the determination, hard as iron, in her eyes. He nodded. They left Miguel in the shack and climbed the ridge on foot. It took 20 minutes. From the top, they could see down into the hidden canyon. It was Silver Mercy, but there was no silver. There were dozens of men, thin as skeletons, dressed in rags, hacking at the rock with pickaxes. Guards, armed with rifles, patrolled the perimeter. A man in a clean, dark suit stood on a wooden platform, directing the work. He was large, with a full beard, and he wore a U.S. Marshal's star pinned to his vest. Clara raised the small spyglass she had insisted on bringing. She focused it. The man turned, yelling at a guard. She gasped, "I know him? From the papers. That is Marshal Riker. He was a hero in the war. A famous lawman." "He is no lawman here," Ashki said, his voice grim. "He is a slaver, and he works for Kincaid." They had their proof, the forged seal, the shipping lists, and now, the visual confirmation a disgraced U.S. Marshal running a slave camp in partnership with Silas Kincaid. They slipped back to the shack as the sun began to set. Miguel was still asleep. "We must go back," Clara said, her mind racing. "We have to get this to someone, a real judge." "My cousin will find him," Ashki said, nodding at Miguel. "He will be safe with my people. We will ride back tonight." As they prepared to leave, Clara looked back at the town, now a faint, uncertain smear of light on the horizon. "They will not believe me," she said, voicing her deepest fear. "The gossip has already started. I saw it in the sheriff's eyes, the schoolmarm who ran off with a dying scout. They will say I am compromised, that I fabricated this." Ashki finished checking his saddle. He turned to her. The day of dust and wind and truth had changed him, too. The hard, indifferent shell had cracked. He saw her, not as a white woman, but as a person. "It does not matter what they say," he said, his voice quiet. "We have the paper. We have the seal, and they do not know we have it." He handed her the reins to her horse. His fingers brushed hers. It was a simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through both of them, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. It was the spark of respect, of a shared danger, of a truth seen with two sets of eyes. It was, for now, enough. They did not return to the town. Miguel, his face slick with a fever sweat, had clutched Ashki's arm. "You cannot," he had whispered, his voice rattling with pain and laudanum. "The proof, the ledger, it is not enough. You have the lock, but Riker has the key. His signature is not on that paper. Kincaid will say you stole it." "He speaks the truth," Ashki said, his gaze fixed on the dark canyon. "Paper can be burned. Riker will deny it. Kincaid will lie. There is another way." Miguel breathed, forcing himself upright. "The back trail. It does not go to the mine. It goes under it. It is where the water sinks." Clara looked at the man, a wounded vaquero she had met only hours before. "Can you lead us?" "I cannot walk, but I can point." Ashki made the decision without a word. He lifted Miguel, whose light frame was rigid with pain, and placed him on his own pony. He shortened the stirrups. "You will ride," he said. "I will walk." And so the group of three moved deeper into the hostile landscape. They were a strange procession, a wounded guide, a dying scout on foot, and an Eastern teacher who had left her old life in ashes. Miguel, strapped to the saddle, directed them away from the open canyons and into a maze of dry, intersecting arroyos. The land here was cracked and thirsty, the rock walls rising like shattered teeth. After an hour, Miguel pointed, There, the dry spring. It looked like nothing, a cleft in the rock, choked with dead tumbleweeds. But Ashki, kneeling, felt the air. "It is cold," he said. He pushed aside the brush. A narrow, dark opening was revealed. It was not a cave, but a tunnel, carved by water over 1,000 years. They left the horses hidden in a blind canyon, hobbled and concealed by a stand of juniper. Ashki carried the boy they had rescued, who was still weak and silent with shock. Miguel, using Ashki's rifle as a crutch, insisted on walking himself. "I will not be carried like a child," he said, his teeth gritted. Ashki went first into the darkness. Clara followed, holding the oilskin packet of proof, her medical bag, and the hand of the young boy. Miguel came last, his every step a muffled grunt of agony. The tunnel was low and wet. It smelled of minerals and damp earth. Far above, they could hear the thump, thump, thump of the mine, the sound of pickaxes. "They are working at night," Clara whispered. "Riker does not waste the moonlight," Miguel hissed. The tunnel opened up, not into the mine itself, but into a deep, sheltered basin on the canyon floor. Hidden from above by a massive overhang of rock, it was lit by 2 blazing campfires. This was not the main camp. This was the receiving area. A line of 20 men, gaunt and chained at the ankles, was being processed. But the man in charge was not Marshal Riker. He was a thin man in a dusty black suit, wearing a round, flat-brimmed hat. He stood behind a small, collapsible desk, a Bible in one hand and a ledger in the other. A fake priest. "You have come here," the man was saying, his voice unctuous and loud, "burdened by sin and by debt. The good Mr. Kincaid, in his Christian charity, has offered you a path to redemption. You will work. You will cleanse your souls in the purity of hard labor. You will sign your mark here, acknowledging your debt to the company, a debt of $50 for your transport and processing. And you will be free men once your debt is paid." A man, his face scarred, spat on the ground. $50? How long is that?" The fake priest smiled, a thin, reptilian expression. "The company pays 10 cents a day for your rations and lodging. The rest, well, that depends on your piety and your strength. Sign, or be returned to the marshal, who is far less patient than I." "It is the legal cover," Clara breathed, her hand tightening on the boys. "They are not slaves. They are indentured servants, paying a debt they can never repay." "Look," Miguel whispered, pointing. A guard was approaching the priest, handing him a new stack of papers. The guard was one of the bounty men who had been with Kincaid in town. Ashki pulled them back into the shadow of the tunnel. "We have seen enough. We have the ledger, we have the seal, and now we have the witness. We have the how." They began their retreat, moving carefully through the dark, wet tunnel. The thump of the pickaxes was their only guide. They emerged from the cleft in the rock, blinking in the harsh moonlight. The relief of their escape lasted for 10 seconds. Well, look what the rocks spat out. 3 men stepped from the shadows of the junipers. Bounty men. They had found the horses. "That's the scout, the one Kincaid wants." The leader, a man with a heavy, drooping mustache, said. He held a repeating rifle leveled at Ashki's chest. "And the teacher, Kincaid's gonna be real happy. $100 for him, 50 for her." "And the breed," another man sneered, spotting Miguel. "We get him for free." Ashki said nothing. He placed the dying boy behind him. He looked at the leader. He looked at the 2 men fanned out to their left and right. He looked at the high canyon walls that trapped them. "The horses," Ashki said, his voice calm. "We'll take 'em, after we take you," the leader said. "Drop the rifle, scout, and you, breed. Drop that crutch you're holding." Miguel let the rifle clatter to the stones. Ashki slowly lowered his own rifle. Now," the leader smiled. "Step away from the woman. We'll deal with you two first. I think a rope." "Now!" Ashki yelled. It was not a word. It was a trigger. Ashki did not dive for his rifle. He grabbed Clara and threw her, hard, toward the ground, shielding her with his own body. In the same motion, his hand, which had been resting on the canyon wall, found a loose shelf of shale. He ripped it free and flung it, not at the men, but at the ground in front of them. The shale exploded in the dark, a spray of sharp, stinging chips. The leader fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet whining off the rock where Ashki had been. "Miguel!" Ashki roared. Miguel, no longer a wounded man, but a desperate fighter, had grabbed his rifle from the ground. He did not try to stand. He fired from his hip, a single, booming shot. He was not aiming for a man. He was aiming for the lead bounty man's horse, tethered 10 feet away. The horse screamed as the bullet tore through its neck. It was a terrible, necessary sound. The animal's collapse created chaos. The other horses panicked, pulling at their reins. "Clara, the bag!" Ashki shouted, shoving her toward the darkest part of the arroyo. "The smoke!" Clara understood. This was not a plan. It was instinct. She scrambled, tearing open her medical satchel. Her hands were not shaking. They were cold. She found her flint, her steel, and a canvas pouch. Ashki was already moving, climbing the low, scrub-dotted side of the canyon. He was impossibly fast, a shadow moving over shadows. The 2 remaining bounty men fired at his vanishing shape. The bullets chipped the rock, high and to the left. "Get him!" the leader yelled, furious, as his horse bled out. "He's trapped!" But Clara had found her tinder. She struck the steel. A spark, a second. The small, dry bundle of cloth and herb caught. She fed it the contents of the canvas pouch, dried peyote root, sage, and sulfur. A thick, acrid, yellow-green smoke boiled up from the ground. It was not a fire. It was a chemical cloud. It stank of madness and burning resin. "What is that witchcraft?" one of the men yelled, his voice thick with panic. The smoke, heavy and oily, clung to the canyon floor, obscuring everything. From the ground, Miguel fired again. This shot was aimed. One of the men cried out and fell, clutching his leg. From high above, Ashki's voice came. "You are standing on a dead man's trail." The leader looked up, his rifle raised, trying to find the source. He saw nothing. He was blind from the smoke, his eyes streaming. Ashki pushed. It was not a boulder. It was a section of the rim, carefully balanced. A trap he had noted the moment they entered the arroyo. A ton of rock and gravel, loosened by the recent storm. It did not fall on the men. It fell in front of them, blocking the arroyo, cutting off their escape. The ground shook. The remaining bounty man, the one who was not shot, took one look at the wall of smoke, the wall of rock, and the unseen shooter on the rim. He turned and fled, scrambling up the far side of the canyon, disappearing into the night. The leader, his mustache wet with sweat, looked at his wounded companion. He looked at his dead horse. He looked at the smoking, stinking ground. He threw down his rifle. "I quit. Do not shoot. I quit." Silence. Ashki slid down the rock face, his rifle now in his hand. Miguel covered the leader, his face a pale mask of pain and triumph. Clara emerged from the smoke, her face smudged with soot, her eyes burning. Ashki walked to the wounded man. The shot had shattered his knee. Clara, without a word, went to him and began to open her bag. "Do not," Ashki said, his voice flat. Clara froze. He is wounded," she said. "He is a slaver. He hunts children." Ashki said. He looked at the leader, who was shaking. "You, tie him. Use his own belt. Tight." The leader, terrified, did as he was told. "Take his horse," Ashki said, "and go. Tell Kincaid what you saw. Tell him the smoke is rising." The man scrambled to his feet, grabbed the reins of the one remaining horse, and fled. They were left with the wounded man, the dead horse, and the young dying boy, who was now clutching Ashki's hand. "We cannot leave him," Clara said, her voice low, gesturing to the groaning man. "He will be found, or he will not," Ashki said. He turned to the boy. He spoke in Dain, his voice soft, the hard edges gone. The boy, who had not spoken a word, finally answered. His voice was thin. He told Ashki his name was Hastian. He told him the bounty men had taken him from his mother's hogan 2 days ago. "Ask him," Clara said, her heart pounding. "Ask him if he saw a white woman with hair the color of the sun." Ashki asked. The boy's eyes widened. He nodded, speaking rapidly. Ashki translated, his face grim. "He saw her at the first camp. She was not with the others. She fought. He said she hit a guard with a piece of iron. She was fierce. He says she is not at the mine." "Where is she?" Clara cried. They said she was too strong, too valuable to break in the mine. They said they were taking her to Depot 13. He says it is a place where they condition the ones who fight to make them obedient. Depot 13. A new name, a new, colder circle of hell. "We have to go," Miguel said, trying to stand. "Kincaid will send everyone." Clara looked at the oilskin packet in her hand. The forged permit, the ledger, the seal. She had the proof. She could go back. She could find a real judge, somewhere. Somehow, she could follow the law. But she looked at Hastian, the boy. She looked at the wounded bounty man, a product of Kincaid's law. She thought of the village, Kincaid's first target. This was no longer about paper. This was about fire. She walked to the smoldering remains of her smoke fire. She took out the forged permit, Kincaid's legal dagger. "Clara, no," Miguel said. "That is the proof." "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is the lie?" She held the parchment to the embers. The corner caught, the paper curled, turning black, the judge's signature, the official seal, all of it turned to ash. "What have you done?" Miguel whispered. "I have chosen a side," Clara said. She looked at Ashki. He cannot use a law that does not exist. Ashki Yazi watched the last piece of paper burn. He understood. She had crossed the line. She had stepped out of her world and into his, a world where justice was not written. It was made. He nodded, a slow, profound gesture of respect, but he knew it was not enough. "Kincaid will not wait for his paper," Ashki said. He walked to the rise, gathering dry wood, building a small, precise pile. "He will come for the village, with or without the law." He used Clara's flint and steel. He lit the fire when it was burning clean. He took his blanket. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. "I am speaking to my people," he said. He held the blanket over the fire, releasing puffs of smoke. 1, 2, a pause. 3 long plumes, a complex, ancient signal. "I am telling Atei, the old woman who leads, that the wolf is at the door. I am telling her to move, not to run, to scatter, to take the high trails, to leave Kincaid an empty village. He will find nothing but stones and wind." They stood on the ridge, the 3 of them, and the boy. The smoke signals rose into the dawn sky. The stakes had been raised, beyond arrest, beyond the law. This was now about survival. Kincaid would have the report from his bounty man. He would know his scout was gone. He would know the teacher was armed. He would know the Dine were alerted. The price on Ashki's head had just gone from $100 to everything. They made a cold camp miles away. Hidden in the rocks, they ate dry jerky and drank the last of their water. Hastian, the boy, finally fell asleep, his head in Clara's lap. Miguel cleaned his rifle, his face tight with pain. He will send Riker next. Riker does not quit. Ashki sat apart, watching the horizon. The bond between them had deepened, forged in smoke and desperation. Clara looked at him, at the quiet strength that seemed to come from the stones themselves. He began to sing. It was not a song of war. It was a low, rhythmic chant, as steady as a heartbeat. It was a hatal, a song of protection. "What does it mean?" Clara asked, her voice soft. Ashki did not turn. He looked at the red cliffs, now turning purple in the twilight. "It is a song for walking in beauty. It reminds us that we belong to the land. The land does not belong to us. It reminds the holy people that we are here and that we are trying to live in harmony." He fell silent. Then he looked at her, his eyes clear in the growing darkness. "You fight like a dying woman," he said. "You used your mind. You made a shield from smoke. It was a good plan." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling more powerful than the brief spark of their touch in the storm. It was not praise. It was acceptance. They were no longer two people. They were an alliance. And they were, she realized, the only justice this land had. The smoke from Ashki's signal fire had barely dissolved into the high, thin clouds before the weather turned. The sky, which had been a clear, indifferent blue, began to curdle, thickening with a bruised, greenish-gray light from the south. The air grew heavy and wet. "The wind is shifting," Ashki said. He attended to Hastian, the rescued boy, binding his small wounds and giving him water. Now, he looked at Miguel. "The camp I am taking him to. It is 2 days' walk for a healthy man. You cannot make that journey." Miguel, who was sitting with his splinted leg propped on a rock, his face pale, spat into the dust. "I am not going to a camp. I am going to Depot 13. I am going to see Riker pay for my leg." "You are going to get yourself killed," Clara said, her voice sharp with the strain of the last 48 hours. She was repacking her medical satchel, her hands efficient and steady. "Your leg has a fever. I can smell it. You need rest, and you need clean water." "And she," Miguel shot back, gesturing to Evelyn's name on the list, "needs a rescuer. Who is going to do that? Maestra Him Riker has 20 guards. You need a gun. My gun." A low rumble of thunder, distant and deep, answered him. Ashki looked at the two of them, the stubborn, wounded pride of the vaquero, the fierce, terrified determination of the teacher. He knew this combination. It was the same fire that burned in him. "We will take the boy to the 3 sisters," Ashki said, making the decision. "It is a rock formation, close. My cousins will be watching for my smoke. They will find him there." He turned to Miguel. You will ride. I will find you a new horse." It took them half a day. Ashkai moved with a grim purpose, tracking the 2 horses that had fled the bounty men. He found them, calmed them, and they returned. He put Hastian on one and helped Miguel onto the other. The boy, Hastian, was a silent shadow, his eyes fixed on Ashki. They left him in the shelter of the 3 tall spires of rock, wrapped in a blanket with a full canteen. Ashki drew a sign in the sand, a yay symbol, and placed a stone upon it. "They will find him," he said, and that was all. The rain began as they rode west. It was not a gentle Kansas shower. It was a cold, driving, high-country rain that turned the dust to slick, red mud in minutes. "This is good," Ashki said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "The rain washes the trail. It makes the guards lazy. They will be inside, by the fire." "Miguel, how do we find this place?" Clara shouted, pulling her wool cloak tighter. "It is not on a map," Miguel yelled back, his face a mask of pain as the horse's movement jarred his leg. "It was an old Army telegraph depot, before the war. Riker rebuilt it. It sits in a box canyon, one way in, one way out." "One way for them," Ashki corrected. There is always another way. They rode for hours, the rain relentless, until they were soaked to the bone. Miguel, despite his bravado, was slumping in the saddle, his body swaying with a dangerous, feverish rhythm. They stopped in the lee of a cliff. "He is dying," Clara said, touching Miguel's forehead. It was burning. "He needs to be cut. The wound is full of poison." "No," Miguel panted, his eyes glassy. "No, no knife. We are close." "You are a fool," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You will die for your pride." "I will die for honor." Miguel whispered, "Ashki, the rendezvous, the dry wash, behind the ridge. Go, I will, be the watch." "He cannot stay alone," Clara protested. "He is right," Ashki said, his voice flat. He looked at Miguel, a long, appraising look. "The fever is taking his leg, but his eyes are still clear. He can shoot." He handed Miguel his own rifle. "You are the lookout. You hear anything but us. You fire 2 shots. We will be back by the time the moon should be high." Miguel nodded, a grim smile. "Go, amigo. Bring the pretty sister. Leave the ugly one for me." Clara, shocked, saw a flicker of the man he had been. Ashki saw the honor. He left the rifle and took Miguel's pistol. "Clara," Ashki said, "we go on foot, quietly, like the rain." Depot 13 was worse than the mine. The mine was a place of brutal labor. This was a place of brutal order. It was a small, high-walled compound, dark and forbidding in the driving rain. A single, dull yellow light burned in the main building. 2 guards, huddled in oilskin slickers, stood under the small protection of the gatehouse. "The walls are high," Clara whispered, her teeth chattering. "Adobe and stone." "But the water," Ashki whispered back. He pointed. A drainage sluice, built to channel water from the box canyon through the compound, ran under the western wall. It was a dark square hole, 2 feet wide, and it was churning. "We go through the water," he said. It is filthy." "It is cover," he said. "Hold your breath." He slid into the ditch, the icy, muddy water rising to his chest. He took a breath and disappeared into the darkness of the sluice. Clara hesitated for 1 second, the image of her warm, clean room in Kansas flashing in her mind. Then she thought of Evelyn. She slid into the water and followed him. The tunnel was 20 feet long, and she thought her lungs would burst. She was pulled forward by the current, blind, until her hands hit his boots. He was standing, the water at his waist, inside the compound. The rain masked the sound of their emergence. They were in a muddy, dark courtyard. Ashki moved. A part of the storm. He came up behind the first guard at the main house. There was no sound. A hand over the mouth. A twist. The man's neck broke with a dull, wet snap. Ashki lowered him to the ground without a sound. The second guard, hearing nothing, turned from the door. Ashki was on him. It was not a fight. It was a removal. The guard crumpled, a knife blade buried beneath his ribs. Clara, her stomach churning at the cold. Necessary violence. Moved to the locked door of the main house. It was a heavy, iron-strapped door. "My bag," she whispered. "My tools." She knelt, her frozen fingers fumbling with the lock. She had brought a small set of surgical probes, fine, hard steel. She worked, her breath held, the tumblers stiff and cold. A click, a second. The lock sprang open. They slipped inside. The air was warm, smelling of stale food, whiskey, and unwashed men. They were in a common room, empty. In the corner, a pot-bellied stove radiated a dull heat. A single lantern lit a hallway. From behind a locked door, she heard it, a woman's cough. This lock was newer, heavier, an iron bar. "Ashki." He did not need to be told. He looked at the hinges. They were on the outside. He used his knife not as a pick, but as a lever. He put his shoulder to the wood and pushed, not hard, but with a sudden, agonizing, silent pressure. The top hinge pin rusted, screeched. "Stop!" a voice from inside. "Evelyn!" Clara cried, her voice a strangled sob. "Clara, my God, is that?" "Clara." "Stand back from the door," Ashki commanded. He did not wait. He threw his entire weight against it. The wood splintered, the iron bar held, but the jamb tore free. The door crashed inward. 4 women huddled in the darkness, their faces pale. Clara saw her instantly. Evelyn was thinner, her blonde hair matted and dark, but her eyes were blue fire. "Clara!" The sisters embraced, a collision of desperation and disbelief. "I came for you," Clara sobbed. "I came to take you home." "You fool," Evelyn said, but she was laughing and crying, holding Clara's face. "You wonderful, crazy fool." "We have to go," Ashki said, his voice urgent, pulling them apart. "Now, more guards." "No," Evelyn's voice suddenly went cold. "I am not leaving." Clara stared. "What, Evelyn? They have hurt you." "They have tried," Evelyn said, her eyes hard. "Clara, listen to me. There is no time. You cannot just rescue me. It will not work." "She is right," Ashki said, his eyes scanning the compound through the window. "They will hunt us. We need to stop them. For good." "I know how," Evelyn said. She grabbed Clara's arm. "I am not just a prisoner. I have been compliant. I clean Riker's office. He's arrogant. He is a drunk, and he is a meticulous bookkeeper." "The ledger," Clara breathed. "The real ledger," Evelyn corrected. "The one that lists the payoffs, the one that lists the dead. It names Kincaid, it names Riker, and it names Judge Thorne, the man who signed Kincaid's permit." "Where is it?" Ashki asked. "In his office, in his safe." "I cannot pick a safe," Clara said, her heart sinking. "You do not have to," Evelyn said, a grim smile on her lips. "He is a drunk. I know the combination. It is his birthday, August 4th, 1842. Riker's office was in a separate building. The rain was their shield. Ashki took out the guard at the door with a thrown knife. Clara's hands were shaking so hard she could barely stand. The safe was behind a map of the territory. Evelyn, her hands sure, spun the dial. 8, 4, 18, 42. The heavy door swung open. It was there, a thick, black, leather-bound book. "We have it," Clara whispered, reaching for it. "Wait," Evelyn's hand stopped her. "If we take it, he will know. He will burn the rest of his papers. He will run, and it will be our word against his. We need a copy." Clara looked at her sister. Then, with a slow, dawning comprehension, she knelt and opened her medical satchel. She removed the bundles of bandages, the bottles of laudanum, the salves. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilskin, was a polished wooden box and several smaller boxes of glass plates. "You brought your camera," Evelyn whispered, her voice full of awe. "I brought it to document the plants," Clara said. "I will use it to document a monster." It was a terrible, frantic race against time. Ashki stood guard at the door, his pistol in one hand, his knife in the other, listening to the rain and the shouts of the guards. Inside, Clara and Evelyn worked. They lit every lantern in the office. "We need light," Clara said. "More light." Evelyn, her face a mask of concentration, held a lantern in each hand. Clara set up the small, collapsible tripod. She focused the lens. She slid in the glass plate. "This is the page," Evelyn said, pointing. "The payoffs." "Hold still," Clara said. She took out the small tin of flash powder. "Cover your eyes." She poured a line of powder onto the flash pan. "Now." She struck the trigger. The whoosh of the flash was followed by a blinding, blue-white light that lit the room like lightning, followed by a puff of acrid smoke. "Did it work?" Evelyn asked. "I do not know," Clara said, her hands shaking as she fumbled to swap the plate. "Again, the next page. The acquisitions. Again, the whoosh, the blinding light." At the rendezvous point, Miguel saw the flashes. 2 of them. He had been fighting the fever, the pain, and a cold, sharp jealousy. Ashki and Clara, they had gone in together. They were a team. He was just the cripple, left behind. He saw the flashes and his blood ran cold. They are caught. That is gunfire. He raised the rifle, his finger on the trigger, ready to fire the 2 shots. But he paused. It was not the crack of a rifle. It was a boom, a flash. He had seen it before, in El Paso, a photographer. He lowered the rifle, his jealousy soured, turning to a grudging respect. She was not just a healer, she was a fighter, and she was smart. He gripped his rifle. His job was not to be jealous. His job was to be the watch. He turned his eyes back to the ridge. He would hold the line. Back in the office, Clara had 5 plates. "That is all I have," she panted. "It is enough," Evelyn said. A whistle cut through the rain, a low, trilling bird call. Ashki was at the door. "That is Miguel. The warning. We go now." They did not go back through the sluice. They went for the front gate. Ashki led, the sisters behind him. They reached the courtyard. "Halt!" A guard, alerted by the flashes, was running from the barracks. Ashki did not hesitate. He fired Miguel's pistol. The man went down. "Out to the horses!" he yelled. They reached the gate. Miguel was there, sitting on his horse. Their own horses tethered. "Guards, 3 of them coming down the canyon trail!" he yelled. "Get on!" Ashki threw Clara onto her horse. He helped Evelyn up behind her. He mounted his own. "Ride, Miguel. Lead them." "This way." Miguel spurred his horse. Not back toward the town, but deeper into the canyons. They rode, 4 riders against the storm, the rain turning the world into a red, muddy hell. They could hear the shouts, and then the rifle fire, behind them. They raced down a narrow arroyo, the canyon walls rising high on either side. The rain was not just falling. It was a solid, moving thing. Suddenly, Ashki reined in his horse, raising his hand. "Stop!" "What is it?" Clara yelled. "They are behind us." Listen. It was not the rain. It was not thunder. It was a low, grinding, roaring sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The ground trembled. "The water!" Ashki's voice was terrible. "A flash flood. Get up. Get to high ground now." He spurred his horse, forcing it to scramble up the slick, muddy side of the arroyo. Miguel was right behind him. Clara, with Evelyn holding on, tried to follow. Her horse slipped, screaming, its legs churning in the mud. A wall of brown, churning water, 10 feet high, carrying rocks and whole trees, appeared at the bend. "Clara, jump!" Ashki yelled. He was on a ledge, 10 feet above her. He reached down. Clara grabbed Evelyn and threw them both from the saddle. Just as the water hit, the horse was taken, swallowed in an instant. Clara and Evelyn landed on the ledge, soaked, bruised, and gasping. They were safe, but they were trapped. The arroyo was now a raging 30-foot-wide river. The ledge they were on was small, and the water was rising. "We are trapped," Evelyn cried, her hard-won composure shattering. "No," Ashki pointed. Across the chasm, 20 feet away, was the other side, and connecting their side to the other, high above the water, was a single, thin spire of sandstone, a natural bridge, no wider than a wagon plank. "The stone bridge," Ashki said. "It is our only way." The ledge beneath them groaned. and a piece of it fell into the torrent. "Miguel," Ashki yelled. "You go first, I will tie the lariat." "No," Miguel said. He looked at his leg. He looked at Ashki. "I will slow you. Go. I will hold them." He raised his rifle. "You will die," Clara screamed. "It is a good day for it," Miguel said, his face calm. "I have seen the proof. I have seen Riker's face. Vayans go." "He is right," Ashki said, his voice hard. "We cannot wait. Evelyn, go!" Evelyn was frozen. I cannot. I will fall." "You will not," Clara said. She grabbed her sister's face. "Evelyn, listen to me. You are alive. I did not come this far to lose you to a little water. You will walk. Go." Clara's own heart was hammering. This was her deepest fear. She had found her. She had found her sister. And now she was going to watch her die. The same cold, sick feeling from the day the letter stopped. She pushed it down. Evelyn, her eyes locked on Clara's, nodded. She turned and began to crawl, her hands and knees scraping, across the narrow stone bridge. The wind whipped at her. The water roared below, but she did not look down. She reached the other side. "Clara, your turn," Ashki called. "The ledge is going." Clara looked at the bridge. She looked at Miguel, who raised his rifle in a small salute. She looked at Ashki and Evelyn, waiting. She took a step. The stone shifted. She froze. "Clara," Ashki's voice. It was not pleading. It was a command. "Walk." She closed her eyes for a second. She thought of her fiancé, the banker. He would have stayed, waited for the law, and drowned. She opened her eyes. She was not that person. She put one foot in front of the other. She did not look down. She looked at Ashki. He was her anchor. He was the unmovable rock. She walked. She was halfway across when the rifle fired. Miguel's shot. Not at her, at the men who had just appeared on the far ridge. A second shot. A third. She scrambled the last few feet, falling into Ashki's arms. He did not hold her. He pushed her behind a rock, next to Evelyn. "Stay down." He unslung his own rifle. He and Miguel, on opposite sides of the canyon, began to lay down a covering fire. The ledge on which Miguel sat began to crumble. "Miguel!" Clara screamed. He looked at her. He was smiling. He raised his rifle one last time, fired, and then the rock gave way. He and his horse were gone, swallowed by the red, angry water. Clara cried out, a raw, torn sound. "He chose," Ashki said, his voice flat, his eyes on the men across the canyon. "He chose his honor." He grabbed her arm. "We cannot stay. They will find a way across. We run." They ran, on foot, without horses, in the driving rain, with the photographic proof of Kincaid's empire wrapped in an oilskin packet in Clara's satchel. They had won, and they had lost. Clara had her sister, but the price was a good man's life. The weight of it was heavier than the camera, heavier than the water, heavier than the land itself. The walk back was a silent agony. The rain had stopped near dawn, leaving the world scoured, cold, and smelling of wet sage and mud. Evelyn, whose strength in the depot had been the hard, bright energy of adrenaline, was now stumbling, leaning on Clara, her body finally succumbing to months of poor food and abuse. Clara, her arm locked around her sister, felt the crushing, paradoxical weight of their victory. The glass plates in her satchel, wrapped in the last of her dry bandages, felt heavier than stone. They had the truth, but Miguel was gone. The roar of the flood, the sight of him raising his rifle in that final, defiant salute, the image of him being swallowed by the red water, played over and over in her mind. Ashki Yazi was a machine. He had not spoken a word since Miguel fell. His face was a mask of cold grief and grim purpose. He had found a high-game trail. a path that skirted the still-flooded arroyos, and he moved along it with a steady, relentless pace. Clara and Evelyn followed. To stop was to die. When they finally saw the town, huddled in the valley below, it was late afternoon. The sun, finally breaking through the clouds, cast a weak, watery light. The town looked wrong. It was too busy. The main street, usually quiet at this hour, was crowded. "He is already here," Ashki said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He stopped them at the edge of the rise, concealed by a stand of piñon. Silas Kincaid had moved fast. He knew they had escaped. He knew his timeline was destroyed. He was forcing the issue. The main street was a tableau of organized rage. Kincaid's men, all of them, the survivors of the storm and the guards from the mine, were present. They formed a loose, armed perimeter, their rifles held openly. But the crowd was townsfolk. The shopkeeper, the blacksmith, the livery owner, the nervous telegraph operator Spencer. All of them had been gathered. Kincaid was on the saloon porch again. This time he had props. Beside him stood Judge Thorne, the real Judge Thorne, the one named in Riker's ledger. The man's face was flushed with whiskey and fear. On his other side stood the thin, nervous pastor, Reverend Bly, and seated in a line of 6 chairs, looking grim, was a jury of 6 men, all of them known Kincaid employees. "It is a people's court," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with contempt. "A show trial. He is legitimizing his war." Kincaid was speaking, his voice rolling over the silent street. "These terrorists, these saboteurs, they have attacked a legal, federally sanctioned operation. They murdered guards. They are allied with the hostile savages who, in their cowardice, burned their own hogans to gain your sympathy." "We have to stop this," Clara said, her voice a low, desperate hiss. Ashki grabbed her arm. "No, it is a trap. He is not trying to convince them. He is trying to find us." "He is right, Clara," Evelyn said, her voice shaking with rage. "Look at them. They are not here for justice. They are here for an execution. He is painting us as the enemy." But Clara saw the faces in the crowd. She saw the blacksmith, his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. She saw the livery owner. His eyes narrowed. They were afraid, but they were not convinced. They just needed a reason to be brave. "They are not all his," Clara said, her voice hardening. "They are just scared." Before Ashki could stop her, she pulled her cloak tighter, covering her satchel, and stepped into the open. Evelyn, after a heartbeat of hesitation, went with her. Mr. Kincaid." Clara's voice was not a shout. It was clear, strong, and it cut through Kincaid's speech like a surgeon's blade. The crowd parted, turning as one. Kincaid stopped, his mouth open. Marshal Riker, who had been standing near the steps, went visibly pale. He had not expected them to be alive. He had assumed the flood, or his men, had finished them. "You are a liar," Clara said. She and Evelyn began to walk down the center of the street. Kincaid recovered quickly, his expression melting into a mask of false pity. "Miss Whitfield, my dear child, grief has undone you. We heard you were lost in the storm. We heard you had been taken, allied with the renegade, Ashki Yazi." "I was not lost," Clara said, her voice never wavering. She stopped at the foot of the saloon steps. "I was a prisoner at your slave camp, Silver Mercy." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. This was more than rumor. "And I am not alone," Clara said. She pulled Evelyn forward into the light. "This is my sister, Evelyn Whitfield, the woman you kidnapped 2 years ago and held at Depot 13. This time, the silence was profound, heavy, and absolute. The townsfolk stared at Evelyn. This ghost returned. "She is mad," Riker growled, his hand moving instinctively to his pistol. "They are both hysterical. The trauma." "We are not hysterical," Evelyn said, her voice ringing with an icy fury that matched her sister's. "And we are not alone. We have the truth. We have your ledger. Marshal Riker." Riker froze. "The real one," Evelyn continued, her eyes burning into his. "The one where you list your payoffs from Silas Kincaid. The one where you list the men who died of fever but were actually shot. The one where you signed off on the bribe payments to Judge Thorne." Judge Thorne, who was visibly drunk, tried to stand, knocking over his chair. This is slander. This is contempt of this court." "And we have this," Clara said. She reached into her stained, muddy satchel. The crowd murmured. Leaning in, she pulled out the polished wooden box of her camera. Then, holding it high for all to see, she pulled out one of the glass plates. "We have photographs," she declared, "of the ledger, of the payoffs, of the forged seal you used to enslave men. We have proof that you, Silas Kincaid, and you, Marshal Riker, are slavers, kidnappers, and murderers." Kincaid did not panic. He was too smart for that. He laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Photographs," he scoffed, turning to his jury. "Forged papers, Mirage's gentlemen." He addressed the crowd. "We have known for weeks that this woman was unstable, that she had consorting with the natives, that she had turned from God." The pastor, Reverend Bly, stepped forward, his face pale and righteous. "Miss Whitfield, it is true, your behavior, running off with that heathen scout. It is the talk of the town. It is an abomination. It is heresy." "It is the truth," Clara yelled, her voice breaking for the first time. "Is it?" Riker shouted, his voice the voice of the law. Strong and confident, he had found his footing. "Or is this the truth?" He pointed, not at Clara, but at the sheriff. "Sheriff, search her room now." The town sheriff, who had been hiding in his office all week, was suddenly brave. Flanked by two of Kincaid's armed men. I have a warrant, based on reports, for suspicion of illegal narcotics trafficking." "What?" Clara was completely stunned. This was not part of the plan. "My men," Riker said smoothly, his gaze sweeping the crowd, "reported that you were acting erratically at Depot 13, that you were incoherent, violent. We believed you were under the influence of opium, or perhaps selling it." The sheriff and his men moved quickly, disappearing into the small room behind the schoolhouse. Ashki, who had been melting into the shadows of the alley between the mercantile and the smithy, watched them go. He knew this move. It was the dagger, the Bilagana law, turning on itself. The sheriff returned, his face grim. He was holding a large, brown bottle, nearly full. "Found this, Miss Whitfield," he said, holding it up. "Under your mattress. Tincture of opium, enough to kill a horse, or to sell to the natives, to keep them compliant." "That is not mine," Clara cried, desperate. I have a medical supply, a small one. But not that you planted it, he planted it." "She is a poisoner," Kincaid roared, seizing the moment. "A heretic, a liar. She has bewitched her own sister. She works with the savage Ashkenazi to destroy this town, to poison our minds and our children." The crowd turned. The shift was visible, palpable. They were simple people. They did not fully understand ledgers or forged seals. That was paperwork. But they understood opium. They understood a fallen woman. They understood heresy. "Arrest her," Riker commanded, his voice booming. "Arrest them both, for murder, for treason, and for poisoning this community." The sheriff, his duty now clear in his mind, stepped forward. "Miss Clara, Miss Evelyn, you You have to come with me." Clara looked at the faces that had, just a week ago, looked at her with respect and gratitude. They were now cold, suspicious, afraid. "You are making a mistake," she said, her voice hollow. "We will hold them in the jail," the sheriff said, his voice full of a terrible, weak apology, "until the circuit judge, Judge Thorne, can convene a proper trial in the morning." It was a perfect trap. The judge was the criminal. The jury was bought. The evidence was planted. As the sheriff led them away, Clara looked desperately into the alley where she had last seen Ashki. He was gone. He had vanished. A cold, terrible despair, colder than the floodwater, settled over her. He had left her. Ashki Yazzie was not gone. He was on the roof of the mercantile, his body flat against the shingles, watching. His heart was a cold, hard stone. He had watched her, so brave, step out of the shadows and into the light, and he had watched the white man's law, like a serpent, twist itself around her throat. He had two choices, two families, two vows. Clara and Evelyn were in the jail. Kincaid and Riker, their enemies now contained, would be moving. Their next step was obvious. The village. Kincaid's legal permit was ash, but his new mandate was justice. He would lead a posse, drunk on whiskey and righteousness, to clear out the hostiles who had aided the murderous Clara. Ashki's vow to his brother, his promise to Ati, his people, versus Clara, the woman who had burned the permit, the woman who had, in the dark of the storm, shared the story of her own loss, the woman who had made his fight her own. He could not be in two places at once. He made his choice. He would be in three. He ran along the connected rooftops, a silent shadow against the bloody sunset. He reached the edge of town, dropping into the alley behind the stables. He gathered dry brush, his movements precise, desperate. He struck his flint to steel. The fire caught. He used his blanket. The smoke signal was different this time. Not run, not hide. It was complex. The language of his ancestors. Enemy rides, divide, ambush at the Windfan Gulch. I am delayed. Hold them. He was splitting his force. He was calling his kinsmen, the riders he had grown up with, to war. He was trusting them to read the signal. And he was trusting Ati. He thought of the old woman, her face a map of wisdom. She had survived Kit Carson. She had survived the long walk. She would know what to do. She would buy him the hours he needed. His duty to the Dine was set in motion. Now, his duty to Clara. He slipped back into the town. The streets were emptying. Men were gathering at the Silver Dollar Saloon, their voices loud, preparing for the posse. Kincaid was buying them whiskey, turning his show trial into a mob. Ashki reached the jail. It was a simple, 3-cell building of brick and iron. One guard, a town deputy, sat out front, his chair tipped back against the wall. Ashki did not go to the front. He went around the back. The building was solid, but the roof was tin, laid over pine beams. He scaled the rear wall, his fingers and toes finding purchase in the rough brickwork where the mortar had crumbled. He lay flat on the tin, the metal cool beneath him. He listened. He could hear Clara's voice, muffled but clear. "It is a lie. Evelyn, he planted it. They will hang us in the morning." "Not if we fight." Evelyn's voice, hard and cold. "Not if I—" Ashki found the ventilation plate. It was bolted down. The bolts rusted. He used his knife, the tip of the blade, applying slow, patient, twisting pressure to the bolt heads. 1, 2. He heard the front door of the jail open. The deputy. "Sheriff, that you back so soon." A new voice. "Riker." "No, deputy. It is me. Go on over to the saloon. Kincaid's buying around for all his loyal men. I will watch the prisoners." "Thank you, Marshal, I surely will." The deputy's footsteps faded. Ashki froze. This was bad. Riker was not a lazy deputy. He was a professional. He was here to finish the job. Ashki heard the clink of keys. He heard the main cell door open. "Well, ladies," Riker's voice, thick with amusement. "A foolish plan. All that work, the photographs, the ride through the storm, all for nothing. You will not get away with this," Evelyn spat. "My dear, I already have." Riker laughed, a low, cruel sound. "The posse is forming. Kincaid rides tonight to clear the canyon. By morning, there will be no village, just land. And by morning, you two, well, there is likely to be a tragic fire here at the jail. The townsfolk, in their rage. You understand. Such a pity." Ashki heard a scuffle, a thud. "Get off her!" Clara's scream. Ashki stopped thinking. He stopped being a scout. He put his shoulder against the tin roof and pushed. The rusted bolts tore free. He ripped the ventilation plate from the roof and dropped, silent as smoke, into the jailhouse. He landed in the dark corridor, between the two cells in the front office. Riker was in the open cell, his back to Ashki. He had Evelyn pressed against the wall, his massive hand over her mouth, muffling her screams. "Riker!" Clara yelled from the next cell, rattling the bars. Riker turned, startled. He saw the shadow. His hand dropped to his pistol. He was not fast enough. Ashki had crossed the 6 feet of the corridor in a single bound. He did not go for his gun. He did not go for his knife. He hit Marshal Riker with his closed fist. A single, brutal, rising blow to the throat. Riker gagged, a wet, choking sound. His eyes wide with shock. He stumbled back, clutching his windpipe, unable to breathe, unable to draw his weapon. Ashki hit him again, this time with the butt of his knife, a hard, calculated strike to the base of the skull. The marshal dropped to the floor like a felled ox, unconscious. Clara was staring through the bars, her hand at her mouth. "There is no time," Ashki panted, his voice a harsh whisper. "Kincaid is riding." He left the keys," Evelyn said, pointing, her voice shaking but victorious. "They were on the desk." Ashki grabbed the keys, unlocked Clara's cell, then Evelyn's. He pulled them both out. "The back way. The roof." "My plates," Clara said, running to the sheriff's desk. Her satchel was there, tossed in a corner. The glass plates were, miraculously, still inside, still wrapped. She grabbed it. "Ashki," Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on the unconscious marshal. She picked up Riker's fallen pistol. We should end this. For Miguel." Ashki looked at the man on the floor. He thought of his brother, hit with a rifle butt. He thought of Miguel, swallowed by the flood. It would be so easy. "No," Ashki said, gently taking the gun from her hand. "He is a Bilagana. He will hang by Bilagana law. We will not be murderers. We will be the truth." He dragged the marshal into the cell Clara had just vacated and locked the door. He threw the keys into the darkest corner of the office. "The roof," he said again. He helped Evelyn up, pushing her through the hole. Then he helped Clara. He was the last one out. They stood on the flat roof of the jail. The town spread out before them. At the far end of the street, the Silver Dollar Saloon was a hive of noise and light. A posse of nearly 30 men was forming. Horses stamping, men shouting, their torches casting wild, dancing shadows. At their head, on his fine chestnut horse, was Silas Kincaid. He raised a burning torch high. "We ride," Kincaid roared. "For justice, we ride to clear the canyon." The mob cheered, a drunken, bloodthirsty sound, and began to move. A dark, armed tide, flowing out of the town and toward the dying village. "We are too late," Evelyn whispered, her voice dead. "No," Ashki said. He pointed. Not at the posse, but to the north, to the high, dark mesas. Clara squinted, her eyes straining in the dusk. She saw it, a single, answering plume of smoke, rising straight and thin in the still air. "Ate," Ashki said, a grim, cold satisfaction in his voice. "She has the message. She is ready." He turned to Clara. His vow to his brother and his fate with her were now the same. "He is riding into her trap," Ashki said. "But my riders are not enough. We must stop him." "How?" Clara asked, her voice desperate. "We have no horses. We have no one. They all believe. They believe we are poisoners." "We have the truth," Ashki said, touching her satchel. "And we have the one person in this town they cannot ignore." "Who?" Ashki pointed, across the street, to the town's other source of power. The saloon was Kincaid's, but the livery, and the hotel, and the mercantile, they all belonged to someone else. "We need to see the widow, Mrs. Allen." They did not use the hole in the roof. To do so would be to announce their escape. Ashki led them from the jail's back door, a single, unlocked plank and iron door, into the deep, wet alley. The town was a different place, the familiar street, usually a place of commerce and clumsy order, was now a hollow, echoing shell. The only sound was the distant, drunken roar of Kincaid's posse, fading as they rode east toward the canyons. Ashki moved like water in the darkness, his feet making no sound on the wet, packed earth. He led them behind the row of silent businesses, the mercantile, the smithy, the assay office. Evelyn, exhausted and weak, stumbled. Clara, her arm locked around her sister's waist, took her weight. "We cannot stay in the town," Ashki whispered, his voice a low vibration in the dark. "Riker will be found in an hour. The sheriff will sound the alarm." "Where can we go?" Clara asked, her own body screaming with fatigue, the weight of the satchel containing the glass plates pulling on her shoulder. "The water," he said, "the river." He led them past the last, dark houses, through a stand of willow and tamarisk, until their boots sank into the soft, muddy bank of the San Juan River. The flood that had killed Miguel had happened miles upstream. Here, the river was high, but calm, a wide, dark ribbon of silver under the rising moon. The air smelled clean, of wet stone and cold water. Ashki found a place, a small, sandy hollow shielded from the wind by a high cut bank. It was out of sight of the town, protected. "Here," he said, "we rest for 1 hour." The tension of the last 2 days, the escape, the trial, the jailbreak, finally broke. Evelyn sank to the sand, her body trembling, and finally began to weep. Not loud, but the silent, racking sobs of a person who had held on for too long. Clara knelt beside her, holding her, speaking soft, meaningless words of comfort. Ashki stood apart, watching the dark, moving water. His grief for Miguel was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He was a scout, a leader. He had led a man to his death. The cost of their victory was too high. Clara, her duty to her sister momentarily complete as Evelyn cried herself into an exhausted sleep, rose and walked to the river's edge. She was covered in mud, her hair matted, her hands raw. She knelt and plunged her hands into the icy water, scrubbing at the grime, at the filth of the jail, at the memory of Riker's face. She looked over at Ashki. He was still standing guard, but he was favoring his left arm. In the moonlight, she could see a long, dark tear in his sleeve, the fabric black with dried blood. "You are hurt," she said. It was not a question. "It is nothing," he said, not turning. "Let me see," she insisted. She walked to him, her medical satchel in her hand. "Do not be a fool. An infection in this place will kill you as surely as a bullet." He hesitated. He was a man who did not accept help, who did not show weakness. But he looked at her eyes, clear and fierce in the moonlight, and saw not pity, but the same practical, healing focus she had shown his kinswoman at the market. He slowly, reluctantly, held out his arm. The cut was deep, a long gash from a splintered piece of wood in the jail. It was foul with mud and blood. "Sit," she commanded, her voice dropping into the calm authority of her profession. He sat on a log, and she knelt before him. She cleaned the wound with water from her canteen, her touch gentle but firm. He did not flinch. She took out a needle and clean gut thread. "This will hurt," she whispered. "It is not the first time," he said. She stitched the wound, her movements precise, the moonlight bright enough for her work. He watched her face as she concentrated, her brow furrowed, her lips set. He saw the lines of exhaustion, the smudges of soot, the terrible strength that held her together. When she was done, she bandaged the arm with a strip of clean cloth torn from her own petticoat. "It will hold," she said, her voice quiet. "You have good hands," he said, echoing the words of the old woman. "They are not cold." They were silent for a long moment. The only sounds were the rushing of the river and the soft breathing of the sleeping Evelyn. The moonlight was so bright it was almost day, a world of silver and black. Clara sat on the sand near him, not touching, but close. "He is really gone," she said, her voice hollow. "Miguel?" Ashki nodded, his gaze on the water. "He chose his death. He died protecting his friends. He died in honor. My people will sing of him." "He was so angry," Clara said, tears welling in her eyes. "And so brave. He died for us, for me, for my proof." "He died for the land," Ashki corrected, his voice gentle. "You, me, your sister. We are just the land, trying to heal itself." He understood that. He was dying. He was Mexican. He knew what it was to be torn in two. He chose to die whole. Clara finally let the tears fall, for the brave, foolish man who had saved them. Ashki watched her cry, his own grief silent, locked behind his ribs. He felt a powerful, unknown impulse. He reached out, not to comfort her, but to connect. His rough, calloused fingers found the back of her hand, resting on the sand. She did not pull away. His touch was not soft, but it was steady. It was an anchor in the cold, dark night. "My vow," he said, his voice low. "The one for my brother. It is not enough. I thought I could protect the land by staying away from your world. I was wrong. What Kincaid does, that is your world. What you did, burning his permit, that was mine. The line is gone." Clara turned her hand, her fingers lacing with his. "I came here to find my sister. I thought I was bringing education, law, order. But there is no order here but the one he makes. There is no law but his." "There is the law of the river," Ashki said. "It flows. It cuts stone. It does not matter how many dams are built. It will always find the sea. It is slow, but it wins." He looked at her, his eyes dark and deep in the moonlight. "I cannot fight Kincaid's law alone. Clara, my riders can stop his posse. But he will return. He will bring soldiers. He will bring more judges." "And I cannot fight him alone," she whispered. "My photographs are just pictures. My proof is just paper. They called me a heretic, a poisoner. They will not listen to me." "They will listen to us," he said. He moved, not pulling her, but shifting closer. He raised their joined hands. This is the law that matters." He lifted his other hand and gently, with his fingertips, brushed the tear track from her cheek. "And this, the water, the salt." He leaned in, and she met him. He touched his forehead to hers. It was not a kiss. It was something more. It was the sealing of a pact, a press of bone against bone, of mind against mind. It was an absolute, silent acknowledgement. "I will protect this land," he vowed, his voice a rough whisper. "Your people and mine." "And I will protect its truth," She vowed back, her voice shaking but strong. Your world and mine. We will protect each other, he said. This was the river vow. It was not a promise of love, not in the way the poets in her Kansas books wrote of it. It was a promise of alliance, of shared fate, of two worlds becoming one defense. It was a bond forged in flood and fire, witnessed by the cold moon and the living water. They stayed like that for a long time, two heartbeats in the vast, silver wilderness. Then, slowly, they pulled apart. The moment was over. The work was not. We have a problem, Evelyn said. Her voice was scratchy, and she was sitting up, watching them, her eyes sharp. You two have made a beautiful promise. Now, how do we keep from being hanged by morning? The spell was broken. Ashki stood, the scout once more. Clara pulled her hand back, her face flushing, and rose to her feet, the healer again. Kincaid's posse is gone, Ashki said. He is riding to an empty village. A tea will lead him in circles, but he will be back, furious. And Riker, he is still in the jail. He will not be for long. Clara said, the sheriff is weak, not stupid. He will free him, and they will come for these plates. They will destroy them. Then we cannot have them, Evelyn said. She stood, wobbly, but her mind was sharp. We have to give them to someone they cannot touch. Who? Clara asked. The whole town thinks I am a witch. Not the whole town, Evelyn said. Mrs. Allen, the widow. Ashki nodded, seeing the logic. The woman who owns the hotel. She owns more than that, Evelyn said. She owns the livery. She owns the mercantile. Kincaid is her tenant at the saloon. He fears her. She has been here 20 years. Her husband was a geologist. He died in a tunnel collapse at one of Kincaid's first mines. She knows exactly who Kincaid is. She has just been waiting. She is neutral, Clara said, remembering her journal notes. She is a spider, Evelyn corrected. And Kincaid has just walked into her web. We will give her the plates. She will know what to do with them. She will know when to release them. She is the town's memory. They will believe her. The plan formed, sharp and clear. Evelyn, you will take the satchel. Clara said, you will go to the back door of the hotel. You will give her the plates, the ledger, everything. You will tell her the truth. She will believe you. And you? Evelyn asked. She is with me, Ashki said. Kincaid's posse is gone, but Riker will not wait. When he is free, he will hunt us. He will not hunt in the town. He will hunt me. He looked at Clara. We have to split his force. Your sister takes the proof. We take the fire. Where do we go? Clara asked, her hand instinctively checking her own. Smaller medical pouch at her belt. The place my riders are waiting, Ashki said, his face grim in the moonlight. Kincaid's posse is large, but Riker's men, the bounty men, they are smarter. They are Riker's real strength. Kincaid is the distraction. Riker is the blade. We must draw that blade away from the town, away from your sister. A trap, Clara said. A battleground, Ashki corrected. The Windfan Gulch. It is a high pass where the wind blows so hard a man cannot hear himself think. It is a bad place for rifles. It is a good place for men who know the stone. He looked at the two sisters. The vow was made. Now came the price. Go, Ashki said to Evelyn. Do not be seen. Do not fail. Evelyn nodded. She took the heavy satchel from Clara. The sisters embraced, hard and fast. Be safe, Evelyn whispered. Be smart, Clara whispered back. Evelyn melted into the shadows, heading back toward the dark, sleeping town. Clara turned to Ashki. They were alone again, by the river. He will come for you, she said. Yes, he said. He and Riker. They will want the savage who freed the prisoners. They will want the heretic who consorted with him. They will want us both. Good, Clara said, her voice hard as the river stones. Let them come? Ashki looked at her, at this woman from Kansas who had faced down gunmen, storms, floods, and false judges. He saw his equal. He turned, not north to the gulch, but south, to the thickest part of the willow grove. First, we get horses. The widow owns the livery. I think she will not mind if we borrow 2. We have a long ride before sunrise. He offered her his hand. Not for comfort, for speed. She took it, and they ran. They rode hard. 2 shadows fleeing the false justice of the town, heading toward the true, hard justice of the land. Ashki had, as promised, borrowed 2 fast, long-legged horses from the Widow Allen's stable, leaving their own tired mounts behind. He knew these horses. They were bred for the high rocks, sure-footed and strong-winded. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that the drumming of the hooves did not. They were riding north, into the wind, chasing the dawn. Ashki rode with the grim focus of a man setting a snare, while Clara rode with the desperate energy of a woman who had just burned her old life to the ground. She clutched the small, vital pouch at her belt, the one containing her medical instruments. Her larger satchel, with the camera and the precious, damning plates, was with Evelyn. Her trust was absolute. Windfan Gulch was well named. They felt it 5 miles before they saw it. The wind, channeled by the high, narrow canyon walls, began to pull at them, a steady, invisible hand. By the time they reached the mouth of the gulch, the sound was a low, steady roar, like a distant ocean. It was a desolate, raw place. The canyon walls were sheer, red rock, scoured smooth by millennia of this relentless wind. The floor of the gulch was sand and loose shell. 4 men emerged from the rocks to meet them. They were dying, their faces hard, their eyes sharp. They were Ashki's cousins, the riders he had summoned. They carried rifles, and their ponies were hidden, sheltered from the wind in deep crevices. Ashki dismounted, his movements economical. He spoke to them in Dine. It was not a language of questions, but of statements. He spoke of Miguel, of the mine, of the jail. He told them of the coming fight. Their faces did not change, but their hands tightened on their rifles. He was their war leader. They were ready. "Clara," Ashki said, turning to her. His voice was loud, nearly carried away by the wind. "You will be here." He pointed to a high ledge, screened by a cluster of dead ironwood. "You can see the floor of the gulch. You will be safe. You are the watcher." "I will not hide," she yelled back over the wind, her hair whipping across her face, stinging her eyes. "You are not hiding," he shouted, his voice a sharp command. "You are the rear guard. If we are broken, you are the one who escapes. You are the one who tells the widow what happened. You are the one who carries the story. Do you understand?" She did. Her role was not to fight. It was to witness and to survive. She climbed to the ledge, her hands raw, her knuckles scraping the stone. From her vantage point, she could see the entire trap. Ashki and his 4 riders were ghosts. They disappeared into the rocks, 2 on each side of the high canyon walls, leaving their horses hidden. They did not have to wait long. The sound of the posse arrived on the wind, a jumble of shouts and the clatter of iron-shod horses on stone. It was a large group, nearly 30 riders, spilling into the mouth of the gulch. Clara saw Kincaid at the front, his face purple with rage, his torch from the town now extinguished. He was riding hard, his arrogance plain. He believed he was chasing 2 fugitives on foot. Beside him rode Marshal Riker. Clara's blood went cold. He was free. He rode with a calm, military precision that was far more terrifying than Kincaid's rage. Behind him were his own men, 6 of them, the hard-faced bounty hunters, his elite guard. The rest of the posse was the drunken mob from the saloon, townsfolk and ranch hands, their courage high on whiskey. They rode halfway into the gulch before Riker held up his hand, stopping the group.
"Silas, you are a fool!"
Riker's voice boomed, cutting through the wind.
"They are not running. They are here."
"Where?" Kincaid demanded, spinning his horse, his eyes straining in the dim, pre-dawn light. Riker pointed, not at the walls, but at the ground. Ashki had left a sign, a single, fresh pony track, deliberately placed, leading deeper into the narrowest part of the gulch. "It is a trap," Riker said, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "It is one man," Kincaid spat. "One savage and 2 women. Are you a coward? Men forward, find them." Kincaid spurred his horse forward, and the drunken posse, yelling and firing their pistols randomly into the shadows, followed him. Riker's men fanned out, their movements professional, taking cover, their eyes scanning the rims. The wind answered. It came howling down the gulch, a solid wall of air, picking up sand and dust. In seconds, the floor of the canyon was a blinding, stinging, roaring cloud of red grit. The world disappeared. The posse descended into chaos. Men were coughing, their eyes blinded. Horses screamed, rearing, terrified by the sound and the lack of sight. "Hold the line," Riker bellowed, his voice muffled by the storm. "Fire at the rims! Fire at the rims!" Rifle shots exploded from the posse, bright, panicked flashes in the red-brown gloom, the bullets whining uselessly off the high rock walls. Then, from the rim, came the answer. Not a volley, a single, precise shot. One of Riker's elite snipers, the one who had taken the highest cover, slumped forward, a hole in his chest. "Where did that come from?" a man yelled. I cannot see anything." Clara, on her ledge, was just above the worst of the dust. She saw it all. Ashki's men were invisible. They were firing into the cloud, at the sound of the posse, at the muzzle flashes. "There!" a bounty hunter yelled. Pointing up, he had seen the flash from one of Ashki's cousins. The bounty hunter, a professional, knelt, raising his heavy sharps rifle, taking aim. Clara watched, helpless. Then a flash of light, brighter than a muzzle flash, hit the sniper directly in the eyes. It was a beam of pure, blinding sunlight, catching the very first ray of dawn as it crested the eastern ridge. The sniper cried out, throwing his arm up, his aim ruined. A moment later, a rifle shot from the other side of the canyon took him. Clara stared, her heart pounding. She saw him, Ashki. He was on the opposite rim, high above them all, lying flat on the rock, holding something small and metal. It was her own silver-backed hand mirror from her medical satchel, the one she'd used for looking into throats. He was catching the dawn, turning light into a weapon, using it to blind the enemy, to designate the targets for his men. Riker saw it too. He is up there, the north rim, get him. 2 of his men broke from cover, scrambling up the rock, firing as they went. And then Ashki moved. He rose, not to run, but to mount his pony. The animal, as sure-footed as a mountain goat, was perched on a ledge that seemed no wider than Clara's hand.
"He is mad!"
Kincaid roared, his voice thick with disbelief, as he pointed. Ashki spurred the pony. The horse launched itself from the ledge, not down, but along the cliff face. It landed on a game trail that was invisible from below, a tiny ribbon of rock. He galloped along the sheer wall, high above the battle, a feat of horsemanship that was impossible, inhuman. He was flanking his own ambush. The posse was broken, confused, caught between the dust, the invisible shooters, and the demon on the wall. Men were starting to panic, turning their horses, trying to flee back the way they came. "Stand, you cowards!" Kincaid bellowed. He saw Ashki, now dismounted, dropping into cover on the canyon floor, cutting off the retreat. Kincaid raised his rifle, a broad smile of hatred on his face. He had him.
"Got you, you savage!"
Kincaid whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. A single gunshot echoed, flat and loud, brutally close. Silas Kincaid jerked. His eyes went wide with a profound, stupid surprise. He looked down. A dark, flowering stain was spreading across the center of his back. He toppled from his horse and hit the ground, unmoving. The posse froze. The shooting stopped. Marshal Riker lowered his pistol, a thin curl of smoke rising from the barrel. He had shot his partner in the back. The man was a liability, Riker announced, his voice cold and commanding, cutting through the dying wind. He was compromised. He was an obstacle to the operation. His 5 remaining elite men looked at him. They understood. This was a change of management. The drunken posse, however, was stunned into silence. Their loyalty, bought with cheap whiskey, now gone, replaced by cold, sober fear. "The operation is now mine," Riker declared. He looked toward the rocks where Ashki was hidden. "Yazzie, I know you are in there. You are a smart man. This was never your fight. It was his." He kicked Kincaid's body. "You have won. Go back to your people. Leave us the mine, and we will leave you the canyon." Silence. Ashki knew it was a lie. Riker was a snake. He was just buying time. Clara, from her ledge, watched Riker. The man was reloading his pistol, his movements calm, but his coat was open. He had been running, scrambling. As he moved, something heavy, wrapped in oilskin, slipped from his inner breast pocket. It was not a gun. It was not a book. It was heavy, and it fell into the dust near Kincaid's body, unnoticed by anyone. Clara's heart stopped. She knew what it was. The real seal. The forged one was paper. This would be brass, the tool itself. Riker saw the silence as refusal. So be it. Men root him out. The fight erupted again, but it was different. It was not a chaotic mob. It was a professional hunt. Riker's 5 men against Ashki's 4. Clara did not watch. She slid from her ledge, her movements desperate, while all eyes were on the rocks. She scrambled down the shale, sliding, falling, until she'd hit the canyon floor. The wind was a whisper now, the dust settling. She ran, low to the ground, toward the center of the gulch. Kincaid's body lay in the open. Riker was dueling with Ashki, firing from behind a rock. She saw the packet. She lunged for it, grabbing it, her fingers closing around the heavy, cold, round object inside. The woman! One of Riker's men had seen her. He raised his rifle. A shot, not from the rifle, from Ashki. The bounty hunter fell. But Riker had seen his chance. Ashki, in shooting the man to save Clara, had revealed his position. Riker stepped into the open, his rifle leveled, his face a mask of triumph. He never fired. Ashki was faster. He did not fire either. He launched himself from the rock, covering the 20 feet in a blur. He hit Riker like a cougar, a collision of bone and muscle. The rifle flew from Riker's hands. It was a brawl. Riker was twice Ashki's size, a giant of a man, strong with rage. He roared, grabbing Ashki, trying to crush him. But Ashki was not a brawler. He was a survivor. He did not fight Riker's strength. He used his own center, his knowledge of the body. He twisted, using Riker's own momentum, and threw the big man to the ground. Riker landed hard, the air driven from his lungs. He was stunned. Ashki landed on top of him. He drew his knife. He raised it high, the dawn light catching the blade. He saw Miguel, his smile, his final salute. He saw his brother, dying on the hard, red earth. He saw all the suffering, all the death, embodied in the gasping man beneath him. Ashki, no. Clara's voice. She was standing there, holding the oilskin packet. Her face was not pleading. It was steady. It was a reminder. He looked at her. He looked at the knife. He saw the path of his brother, the path of Kincaid. The path of Riker. The path of blood. He turned the knife in his hand. He reversed it. He struck Riker, not with the blade, but with the heavy pommel. A single, sharp blow to the temple. Riker went limp, unconscious. Ashki stood, his chest heaving. The fight was over. His 4 cousins emerged from the rocks, their rifles steady. Riker's remaining 4 men, seeing their leader down and their escape cut off, threw down their weapons. Clara ran to him, her hand outstretched, showing him the packet. "I have it, the seal, the real one." Ashki took it. He hefted its weight. This was the final piece, the proof. He looked at the bound bounty men. He looked at the unconscious Riker. He did not have irons. He uncoiled his lariat from his saddle, the one he had taken from the widow's stable. He cut it into lengths. He bound Marshal Riker, not with a killer's knot, but with the tight, secure loops of a man handling livestock. This was not revenge. It was justice. It is over," Clara whispered, the reaction finally setting in, her legs trembling. "No," Ashki said. "Look." A new sound, horses, a large group, coming up the gulch, slowly, deliberately. Not riders, townsfolk. They were on foot and on wagon, 20 or 30 of them. The blacksmith, the livery owner, Mrs., Allen's foreman, Spencer, the telegraph operator, and at their head, her face pale but resolute, was the widow Allen herself. They were not a lynch mob. They were a citizenry. They stopped, taking in the scene. The dead, the bound, Ashki, the savage, standing over the tied-up, heroic Marshal Riker. And then they saw the body of Silas Kincaid. The blacksmith walked forward, his heavy hammer in his belt. He looked at the body. He looked at the bullet hole in the back. "Evelyn, she told me," the widow Allen said, her voice quiet but carrying in the now still air. "She showed me the pictures, the ledger." She held up a single, developed glass plate. "We found this on the church door, pinned there, for all to see." The town, the real town, had seen the truth. He was a monster, Spencer whispered, looking at Kincaid. The blacksmith looked at Riker. "Trust on the ground." He looked at Ashki. This was your doing?" the blacksmith asked, pointing at Riker. "He shot Kincaid," Clara said, stepping forward. "He betrayed his own partner. We have the proof. We have the seal." The blacksmith nodded, a slow, grim understanding dawning. He turned to the men he had brought. "Get the wagon. We are taking the prisoners, all of them." He pointed at Riker's bound men. And him. 2 men went to Kincaid's body. He was not dead. A low, terrible groan escaped his lips. The bullet had missed his spine. He was paralyzed, but alive. "Get him too," the blacksmith said, his voice flat, devoid of pity. "He will stand trial, a real trial." The townsfolk, no longer a mob, but a community, surrounded their fallen tyrant. They lifted him, a dead weight, and put him in the wagon. They tied Riker, still unconscious, and threw him in beside his former partner. The wind in the gulch had stopped completely. The air was perfectly still, the silence profound. And in that silence, 2 sounds began. From the high rim, one of Ashki's cousins began to beat a small hand drum, a slow, steady rhythm, a heartbeat, a song of mourning for Miguel, and a song of victory. And from the valley below, faint but clear, came the sound of the town's church bell, not the panicked ringing of the alarm, but a slow, steady, tolling, clang, 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 a call to order, a call to reckoning. The 2 sounds, the drum and the bell, one from the earth, one from the sky, met in the quiet air of the gulch. They did not clash. They wove together, a single, new pulse, the two heartbeats of the land finally beating as one. The town did not descend into chaos. It awoke. The return of the townsfolk from Windfan Gulch was a somber, silent procession. It was not a victorious posse. It was a group of citizens leading a wagon that held their own shame. Riker and his men, bound tightly with their own lariats, were locked in the very cells they had planned to burn. Silas Kincaid, paralyzed and groaning, was taken to a room in the Widow Allen's hotel, a prisoner in his own empire, under the watch of two grim-faced men from the livery. Evelyn, her face scrubbed clean, had met the procession at the edge of town, standing beside the widow. The glass plates, the truth, had already been secured. The first act of the new fragile order was not to a judge, but to the telegraph. Spencer, his hands no longer shaking, sat at his key for 3 hours. He did not send a single wire. He sent a torrent. He wired the unearth marshal's office in Santa Fe, not about an escape, but about the arrest of one of their own for slavery and murder. He wired the territorial governor, not with a complaint, but with a formal accusation against Judge Thorne, backed by the signatures of every business owner in town, starting with the Widow Allen. And he wired the Santa Fe New Mexican, giving them the story of a lifetime. The response was not immediate. For 3 days, the town held its breath. They were an island of fragile justice, waiting for the mainland to decide if they were heroes or traitors. The church bell rang for services, and for the first time, the pews were full. The saloon, Kincaid's den, remained dark, its doors locked by the widow. Ashki, Yazi, and his cousins did not enter the town. They camped on the mesa, a silent, watchful presence, ensuring no more of Riker's men came from the south. Clara and Evelyn stayed at the hotel, under the widow's protection. The sisters spoke for hours, piecing together 2 years of pain, binding the wounds of their separation. On the morning of the 4th day, the federal government arrived. It was not a posse or a cavalry detachment. It was a single, black-painted carriage, escorted by 6 sober, disciplined federal marshals who wore their stars on clean vests. They were not for hire. Out of the carriage stepped a man named Elias Wade, a federal circuit judge from Washington. He was thin, gray-haired, and his eyes, behind small spectacles, missed nothing. He did not go to the jail. He did not go to the hotel. He convened his court in the only building in town that had not taken aside the schoolhouse. Clara watched as her small room, the place she had taught arithmetic and spelling, was transformed. The marshals brought in a heavy oak table and a flag. Judge Wade sat, and the entire town, along with Ashki's people, led by Ati, gathered outside, pressing against the open windows. "I have read the telegraphs," Judge Wade said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I have heard the accusations. Now, I will see the proof." The trial lasted 2 days. It was not Kincaid's theater. It was a dissection. The Widow Allen presented the glass plates, which were held up to the sunlight for the judge to see. She presented Riker's ledger, which Evelyn had retrieved from the hotel safe. Evelyn was the first witness. She spoke for 4 hours. She did not weep. Her voice was a cold, clear, surgical instrument. She laid out the entire operation, the names, the dates, the shipments of indentured men, the murders, the payoffs. She named Judge Thorne, who sat in the corner, sweating and shaking, under the gaze of a federal marshal. Clara was the next. She presented the brass seal, the one she had taken from Riker's pocket. She told of the burning of the false permit, an act of justice, not law. She told of the planted opium, and the sheriff, who now sat in his own jail, had already confessed to planting it. Then Judge Wade called for Ashki Yazi. A hush fell as Ashki entered the schoolhouse. He did not look like a savage or a renegade. He wore clean cotton trousers and a dark shirt. He stood before the judge, not with arrogance, but with the profound, still dignity of the land itself. "You are accused of murder," Judge Wade said, "of sabotage and of inciting a riot." "I am accused of those things by the men you are here to judge," Ashki replied, his voice calm. "I did not murder. I fought. I did not sabotage. I protected my kin. I did not riot. I stopped a mob." "Tell me," the judge said, "what you want." "I want what she wants," Ashki said, nodding to Ati, who stood in the doorway. "Our land, our water, to be left alone." The final witnesses were the men from Silver Mercy, the slaves who had been freed by the federal marshals in the wake of the arrests. Their gaunt faces and scarred backs were more powerful than any ledger. The verdict was swift. Judge Thorne was stripped of his title and arrested. Kincaid, who had been carried in on a stretcher, conscious and sneering, was found guilty of conspiracy, kidnapping, and slavery. Marshal Riker, his throat bruised, his face a mask of cold fury, was found guilty of the same and of the murder of Silas Kincaid. "I shot him," Riker said, his one and only statement, "because he was incompetent, not because I'm guilty of these other fantasies." The judge was unmoved. "They will be transported to the federal prison at Yuma," he declared. "They will serve life at hard labor. The mine is to be shut down, its assets seized." A great shuddering sigh of relief went through the crowd. It was over. But Judge Wade was not finished. He turned to Ashki and Atia. "The matter of the Dine lands is more complex," he said. "The railroad holds a charter. The charter was based on a fraudulent survey." Clara stepped forward, her voice respectful but strong. "The survey was paid for by Silas Kincaid. The hostilities that justified it were manufactured by Marshal Riker. The permit was signed by a corrupt judge. The entire foundation is a lie." Judge Wade looked at her, a long, appraising look. "So it is." He spent the next day not in the court, but on the land. He rode with Ashki, with Clara, and with Atie. He saw the burned hogans. He saw the sacred canyon. He saw the village, where the people were slowly, cautiously returning. He made his ruling on the steps of the church. The Dine land, all 20,000 acres of the canyon system, was to be recognized as a cultural trust. It was not a reservation. It was their land, protected by federal treaty, in perpetuity. The railroad charter was rerouted, 20 miles to the south. Furthermore, an agreement, written by Clara and translated by Ashki, was signed. It guaranteed the village access to the river water. Upstream of the town, it allocated federal funds for 2 new buildings, a permanent multi-room schoolhouse, and a town clinic. The repair of the town, the mending of its soul, began slowly. Clara Whitfield did not return to Kansas. She was, by unanimous vote, hired as the teacher for the new school. Her first act was to petition for 2 assistants, one who spoke Spanish and one who spoke Diné Bizad. The schoolhouse became a place of 3 languages, a place where the children of the vaqueros, the children of the town, and the children of the Dine learned arithmetic and history and medicine side by side. Ashki Yazzie did not melt back into the canyons. The respect he had earned from the town and the authority he had displayed had made him indispensable. The federal government, in its wisdom, offered him a formal position, chief scout and mediator for the San Juan territory. He was the bridge. He was the man who spoke both languages, who understood both laws, who ensured the river vow was kept. Evelyn Whitfield, her health slowly returning, found her own calling. She had seen the inside of the machine, the dark gears of trafficking and indentured servitude. When Judge Wade prepared to leave, she asked to go with him. "I cannot be a victim, Judge," she told him. "I must be a witness." He saw the steel in her, the same sharp, intelligent fire he saw in her sister. He hired her on the spot. She became his chief clerk, and over the next 10 years, She would be instrumental in writing the very federal laws that dismantled the indentured labor system across the entire West. The sisters said their goodbyes, not with sorrow, but with a fierce, shared pride. They were both, in their own way, free, and the memory of Miguel was not forgotten. The story of his sacrifice at the arroyo became a local legend. The vaqueros who had ridden with him, who had known his laughter and his quick temper, did not let it fade. They formed a free patrol, the Vaqueros de Miguel, and they, not the federal marshals, were the ones who truly kept the trade routes clear. They rode, not for money, but for the honor of the friend they had lost. The town itself began to heal. Some who had ridden with Kincaid in the final posse left, unable to live with their shame or their fear. But most stayed. One Sunday, the blacksmith, the one who had led the townspeople to the gulch, stood up in the church. He was a large, quiet man, not given to speeches. I rode with Kay. He stopped, unable to say the name. I rode for the whiskey. I rode because I was afraid. I believed a lie because it was easier than the truth. I was wrong. I ask forgiveness. From this town, and from our neighbors. He looked at Ashki, who was standing in the back of the church, his arms crossed. Ashki did not move. He simply nodded. Once, it was enough. The healing had begun. The drought broke. It did not just end. It was washed away in a season of cleansing. Silver rain that began in the high mountains and rolled down into the valley, swelling the San Juan, turning the red dust to dark, fertile mud. The land, which had been clenched in a fist of heat, finally uncurled its hand. It was the year 1880, one full year after the trial, and the town was celebrating the first harvest. It was not a trade day. It was a festival. The air was clear, smelling of wet pinon and wood smoke. The main street, once a channel of dust and fear, was full of tables. The widow Allen had declared a town holiday. From the new, larger porch of the Mercantile, she watched, her face, which had been a mask of iron for 20 years, softened by a quiet, satisfied smile. In the center of the street, where Kincaid had once held his show trial, a great fire pit had been dug. Around it, people gathered. The lines that had once been so sharp, so deadly, had begun to blur. The blacksmith, his face clean, shared a pipe with one of Ashki's cousins. Children, their faces a mix of Dine, Mexican, and white, chased each other, their shouts a jumble of 3 languages. From the south, a group of riders approached. They were not a posse. They were the Vaqueros de Miguel. They rode with a disciplined pride, their saddles trimmed with silver. They dismounted and were greeted not with fear, but with cheers. They were the law now, the true law, the protectors of the trade routes, and they had brought 3 fat steers for the feast. As the sun began to set, casting a deep, peaceful red light across the mesa, the storytelling began. Ati, the old woman, her eyes bright as a hawk's, sat in a place of honor. She did not tell an old story. She told a new one. She told of the woman from the east, the one with good hands and a fighter's heart, who had come seeking her sister. She told of the scout, the shadow walker, who had made a vow to his brother to protect the land. And she told of the vaquero, the one who was 2 peoples, who had died a warrior's death at the canyon of the flood. A man on a guitar, one of Miguel's friends, began to play a soft, strong corrido. It was the Ballad of Miguel, a song of sacrifice and honor that was already being sung from here to Santa Fe. The people listened, their faces lit by the fire. The legend was being woven. It was no longer his story or her story. It was theirs, the story of the river vow, a promise made by the water, under the moon, to heal the land. 2 new buildings stood as proof of that vow. The schoolhouse was now 3 rooms. The main room was for lessons. The second room was a small library, already filling with books sent by Evelyn from Washington. and with scrolls of dine history provided by Ati. The third room had a separate door and a sign, painted in Clara's neat, clear hand community clinic and birthing room. Inside, Clara was finishing her last appointment of the day. A young dine woman, her husband waiting nervously outside, was there for her final check. Clara, her hands gentle and sure, listened to the baby's heartbeat. "He is strong," Clara said, smiling. "His heart sounds like a drum, just like his mother's." The woman smiled, a shy, grateful expression. Clara was more than the teacher now. She was the healer for all the people, her skill blending the carbolic acid and sterilized tools of the East with the herbal knowledge she was learning, humbly, from Atei. The fields, too, were new. Where Kincaid had tried to steal the water, the people now shared it. A new irrigation ditch, dug by the blacksmith, the vaqueros, and Ashki's cousins, diverted a small, fair portion of the river to the town's gardens and, for the first time, to the village's cornfields. The land was blooming. Clara finished her work and stepped out into the cool, purple twilight. The sounds of the festival, the music, the laughter carried on the air. She walked, not toward the fire, but away from it, toward the river. He was waiting for her. Ashki Yazi stood on the bank, in the same sandy hollow where they had hidden, where she had stitched his arm. The moon, full and silver, was rising. Just as it had been that night, it laid a path of light across the water. The river was high, full, and alive. He was no longer just the shadow scout. He was the mediator, a man who walked in both worlds, who carried the trust of the federal judge and the wisdom of his own people. He spent his days not in hiding, but in council, settling the small disputes of land and water that were the pulse of a living community. Clara came and stood beside him. They did not touch. Not at first. They stood, partners, watching the water flow. "They are singing for Miguel," she said, her voice soft. "It is a good song," Ashki said. "He would have liked the noise." She smiled, a small, sad smile. "Evelyn sent a letter. Judge Wade has used her testimony, her ledger, to open an investigation into 3 other mining operations in Arizona. She is saving them. Ashki. So many." "She is a fighter," he said, like her sister. Clara looked at him. In the moonlight, his face was calm. The lines of grief and vigilance softened, replaced by a deep, quiet strength. He was no longer a man braced for a fight. He was a man who had found his balance. "The clinic is finished," she said. "The first baby will be born there next week." "That is good," he said. "The land needs new voices." He held out his hand. She took it. Their fingers, his rough and strong, hers slender and sure, laced together. It was a familiar, solid feeling. They wore no rings. Rings were metal, a cold circle, a bilagana sign of ownership. Instead, around each of their wrists, they wore a single, parallel braid. It was a thin cord made of 2 strands of tough, cured leather, one dark, one light, woven together by Atai. It was not a chain. It was a knot of alliance, a symbol of the vow, of 2 paths running side by side, never merging, but always connected. "You have done it," she whispered, her head leaning against his shoulder, a gesture of complete trust. "You kept your vow to your brother." Ashki looked out at the water, at the wide, dark land that was, for the first time in his life, at peace. "We kept it," he corrected. He turned and looked at her, his eyes holding the silver light of the moon. "Freedom. I used to think it meant being left alone, being untouched. I thought it meant the law." She said, "Paper, rules." "We were both wrong," he said. He brought her hand up, the one with the braided cord, and held it against his chest. "Freedom is not a fence. It is an irrigation ditch. It means taking care of each other and taking care of the land. He leaned down, and she rose to meet him. Their kiss was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a first passion, but the deep, sure and steady kiss of two people who had seen the worst of the world and had chosen to build a new one, together. Above them, the sky was a vast, dark field of stars. A great hawk, hunting late, soared on the night air, its wings black against the moon. The San Juan River, full and mighty, flowed past them, carrying its promise to the sea. The red horizon, which had once been a line of fire and blood, was now just the dark, sleeping edge of the earth, waiting, in peace, for the dawn. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Let us know in the comments. We would love to connect and hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to Wild West Tales and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people, just like you.